y'all. Yes, y'all. We the best, y'all. Pass the test, y'all. Niggas know that's that real type of rap. Y'all niggas don't want to scrap. This is real shit. Real going harder. Y'all niggas better squad up because we got to go.
Then the brick in this bitch. This shit right here is the hit. I ain't even right
We
shit.
about to go harder.
I don't care what you do. If you ain't rolling with my damn
Feel
crew,
me? We about to go harder.
you can get off my dick. You niggas
Y'all
making
not
hits, you
listening,
ain't
man.
right shit.
We about to go harder.
Than the game ever seen.
If you hit with me, rolling with the squad, man, you better go harder.
O.stylez, let's get 'em. Go.
The underworld father, we about to go harder.
I don't care what you do. If you ain't rolling with my
You
damn
not hear
crew,
from me, we about to go
get
harder.
'em.
Turn the beat up,
Turn
I
it
don't
up.
give a fuck a nigga getting beat up. If they fuck with us, underworld is the real type of scripture, no discussion. I'ma start busting on your niggas acting like y'all don't know who the hype is. When I write shit, it's exclusive. This a freestyle hype, no type of right shit. This is just spit from the mouth cause I'm hype kid. And we not playing around. About to lay this shit down. Your new niggas bunch of clowns. We going harder right now. We going harder right now. We going harder right now.
Freestyle.
Call the nigga O.stylez.
O.stylez and JK.
JK put it down.
Going harder than the brick in this bitch. This shit right here is a hit. I ain't
We
even
about to
right
go harder.
shit. I don't care what you do. You ain't rolling with my damn crew,
We going a little harder.
you can get off my dick. You niggas
It's
making
a
hits, you
freestyle,
ain't
nigga.
even right
I'm about
shit.
to go harder.
Then the game
I ain't
ever
even write
seen.
this shit.
Underworld
I
is
just
the
hype the
realest on
shit,
the
nigga.
screen.
I always go harder.
Than the brick in this bitch. This
O.stylez.
shit right here is a
Freestyle,
hit.
one
I
take.
ain't
I did
even
not
right
write this.
shit. I don't care what you do. If you
Drunk,
ain't
I'm
rolling
high.
with my damn crew,
Getting fucked up doing this underworld shit.
you can get
Battle
off
me
my
at.
dick. You
I
niggas
just
making
spit
hits,
the
you
rap
ain't
from my
even right
fucking dome
shit.
sag from the fucking trap.
Then the
This
game ever
true
seen.
facts.
Underworld is the
Reality
realest on
rap
the
is
screen.
back. Original stacks going harder.
In this bitch.
Squatter. We about to go harder.
Hey man, you know I'm right here. You can say that shit to my face. Hey man, you know I'm right here. You can say that shit to my face.
Who the hell do you think you
Hey
are?
man, you know I'm right here. You can say that shit to my face. Hey man, you know I'm right here. You can say that shit to my face.
Why haters wanna hate, try to imitate O.stylez the great many beef plates I ate state to state. Haters hate his face, cause I can't leave you without a trace in this place. In that ass like a prostate. I migrate, my mind state fiery. Haters hate the hate when I carry tons like Billy Babgate. My money comes with decibels like 8. Yo, my dummies hit testicles from the 8. Never know how many bums I ate. Roll the tape. Got soldiers that'll blow your face, ride or die, riding by on roller skates. Got chicks that'll get the poker face, then poke your face. Ain't no one safe, catch a case for a briefcase. Yo, we don't lead chase, bomb the place, race out of place, like outer space. Pull the dun-da-da top, shot his head, Dr. Red, dodger from the wild. What a pussy squatters get beaten up with the blocker, cop, blockers, cock, the shot his head is strong. As that possum when they see the chopper red as a lobster, hot head red, dead as a lobster, smoking head like a roster rock star. Yo, what's up, Charles? Underworld official mob star. Yo, this takeover about to start. You online gangsters, I'm market like targets, control all deleting rates into darkness. East to west, I spread underworld pestilence. Still have been sent to all you devilish, hell bent, lonely, lame dudes. Live on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube. I'm talking to you, dude. This is just a taste. Drop sand into my face. Or play the shadow when you niggas say as a Spain 8 to that Joker cut and poke your king, queen, jack, blackjack. You ain't over, it's over. You true soldier, I will fold ya.
Hey man, you know I'm right here. You can say that shit to my face. Hey man, you know I'm right here. You can say that shit to my face.
Who the hell do you think you
Hey man,
are?
you know I'm right here. You can say that shit to my face. Hey man, you know I'm right here. You can say that shit to my face. Hey man, you know I'm right here. You can say that shit to my face. Hey man, you know I'm right here. You can say that shit to my face.
Who the hell do you think you
Hey
are?
man, you know I'm right here. You can say that shit to my face. Hey man, you know I'm right here. You can say that shit to my face.
You don't want it. For all y'all niggas out there, I don't really even do this, man. I'm letting my Underworld officials take over the whole 2014 scene. We about to show y'all something in the Underworld regime. I'm falling back. For all y'all niggas out there, y'all online niggas talking shit, running your mouth from behind your computer. Don't slip up, don't trip up, don't fall in some shit.
As the real walks before you, ask that you look down on us and bless us. Let us pray. Oh, Lord, please walk with me. Walk with me. Dear God, please talk to me. Talk to me.
Cause we need you now.
Oh, Lord, please walk with me. Walk with me. Dear God, please talk to me. Talk to me.
Cause we need you now.
The Lord is my shepherd, but I shall not want. You are the Almighty Father, so I shall confront. You to make me lie down in green pastures beside the still waters and block the evil presence with your borders. And help me restore my soul. Lay your hands upon my life to get it back in control. You already know the main reason why I'm writing this is so you can lead me in the paths of your righteousness. Though I walk through the valley of death, I shall fear no evil. I always believe you will art with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And with this knowledge, I sit comfortably. Prepare a table in the presence of my enemies and let them acknowledge the essence of my energy. Goodness and mercy follow the days of my life, and I will dwell in your house every day of my life. Oh Lord, please walk with me. Walk with me. Dear God, please talk to me. Talk to me.
Cause we need you now.
Oh Lord, please walk with me. Walk with me. Dear God, please talk to me. Talk to me.
Cause we need you now.
God, Father, I pray forgiveness for my lonely sinners, for my bad ways. Looking through these holy scriptures, you can see my soul. I'm unfaithful. I got my plate full, trying to be grateful. But my back's down, when my tears fall. Where I hear streams see, that's as pears crawl. How the blood runs, full of envy. The revenge took a damn on my enemies. If I take a life, lay passed away. This is the afterlife, me dog, I cast away to a place where evil earth demons run. I got my vest on, stay with a heated gun. This is the reason, son, my redemptions, the confessions, the lies, the conniptions, repercussions, play strong part of me. On the blocks, pushing rocks with the armory. So call for me when the chips are down. Me standing up saying, brother, get down. You're my wish now, it's my heart to be in the Lord's hands as he walks with me.
Oh Lord, please walk with me. Walk with me. Dear God, please talk to me. Talk to me.
Cause we need you now.
Oh Lord, please walk with me. Walk with me. Dear God, please talk to me. Talk to me.
Cause we need you
Here are some words to Jesus. Looking down, I know you see us. The only soul on this whole globe who won't deceive us, even non-believers. And reapers couldn't stop the speaker. That's why we trying to reach it. Preach on. The reason I can ask forgiveness in the song. Although I was wrong all along. My vision impaired, it's the truth for dead out here. These cold streets ain't fair. Plus I was scared and didn't care. I felt I had to. Plus I was mad too. Now my battle scars are tattoos. I pray to you with gratitude. I hope I reach a latitude. Not the baddest dude. I'm more like a radical. It never ever matter who they ran and tattled to. I'm a splatter food. Now I just battle cruise. I won't rattle tools, carve cattle dudes and rap feuds. First I do is get sued. For speaking views on the news. You know how I do. Reality's true. I know a lot. I seen a lot from you. You had my back when I had to flee the block. And it mean a lot. Like when I got mistreated and beat by cops. To my knees I drop.
Rest in peace to all the deceased. Oh Lord, please walk with me. Walk with me. Dear God, please talk to me. Talk to me.
Cause we need you now.
Oh Lord, please walk with me. Walk with me. Dear God, please talk to me. Talk to
listening, cause we need you now. They got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. I'm getting fucked up cause they got me fucked up. Fucked up. Fucked up. Fucked up. Fucked up. Fucked up. They got me fucked up. Fuck around with this one take. When I make the earth shake, earthquake. This nigga time to shake and bake hot as the oven. You niggas can't stand above him. O.stylez nigga back in the building, chillin', rap villain, trying to make $1 million in these streets. Get a killin', get $1 billion for a head on a rap nigga. Crap nigga, this the fact nigga. I don't act nigga, back nigga. JFK all day, testimony in your hallway, selling raw yeah. This a freestyle, nigga fucking record, nigga play, listen back every day, say what I say. I'm in this shit, I'm in this bitch, I'm in this place. We all getting rich, we taking over Underworld official. I'm a so fucking official. You niggas getting wiped like that tissue off the map. You niggas don't wanna fuck with this real rap from a motherfucking trap. I'm in here, yeah, get it. I'm going so hard when I come through with my fucking squad. The world. They got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. I'm getting fucked up cause they got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. I'm getting fucked up cause they got me fucked up. 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 They got me fucked up. Niggas got me fucked up, so they about to get fucked up. Fuck around with the real young buck. Niggas getting struck with them shots to they chucks. You niggas turn around, getting hit in your nuts. Now who the fuck is nigga think he like he tough stuff on the block? Get snuffed on the block, get straight fucking knocked the fuck out. We don't know what the shit about. Niggas don't pull no shit out your mouth. They on the fucking route. We trying to get this dough in the bout. Banging any motherfucker that's in the fucking way. We don't even care if you from the NY, if you from the fucking star, if you from the NJ. Who died, multiply, who is I? Old sticky D, getting busy. Really, feel me, I will kill the enemy. Trying to pose me and my motherfucking doors closed. I'm trying to get this fucking dough. Check the underworld flow, freestyle from the mental. Have to stop, but I go. Real hip hop for the show, and you niggas better know how it go. Let's go. They got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. I'm getting fucked up, cause they got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. I'm getting fucked up, cause they got me fucked up. 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 They got me fucked up, thinking that I don't know what is up. Left and right all night, I'm trying to rock this mic. I'm trying to bring insight on life. I'm trying to keep this fucking crowd hype. This freestyle didn't have to write, just hit record when I wanna do the thing. Get applause when I let the thing bang. That's my slogan. That's how I'm rolling, mic controlling all across this globe. It's freestyle, it's O.stylez, it's Underworld. We running miles, we take it over, we hold it down. I wear the crown, JFK and worry down. I'm getting fucked up, cause they got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. They got me fucked up. I'm getting fucked up, cause they got me fucked up. Fucked up. Fucked up. Fucked up. Fucked up. Fucked up. Stop.
I'm bringing y'all what y'all missing, man. The new age of hip hop. You won't see a lot of artists coming through doing anything in this underworld official movement. This is the underworld movement. We back in the building, man. 2014 is a definite takeover. Underworld official, world on fire, man. Shout out to the brothers doing what they do, man. This is what it is, y'all. Let's get back into some music, man.
To bring them down, blood falls around me and never drown. Underworld visions got these cycles wishing now. Bring around karma, bring them down. They can't stop us once we set this world on fire. About to bring them down, blood falls around me and never drown. Underworld visions got these cycles wishing now. Bring around karma, bring them down. They can't stop us once we set this world on fire. Set it blaze, turn the game, earn the fame. Every step I take, I learn again and pain and wisdom flowing in my veins. It's off the school bleachers, pray out the weak ones. Used to be one until I learned to fight back. Now I spill guts, now I got these haters telling me nice track, I still got your dagger in my back. Get the fuck out of here with that shit before I wreck your face and be done with it. Be done with it. War in my DNA, pop your head like a bag of freedom, man. Use this fucked up head as a motivator to cause disorder. Straight up eliminator, call me Terminator. Acting like a robot, motherfucking innovator.
Take that paper, soon as I see it shine, I'ma take it. You sneak this, sir. Do the shit every day. Yeah, respect my shit every day.
About to bring them down, blood falls around me and never drown. Underworld visions got these cycles wishing now. Bring around karma, bring them down. They can't stop us once we set this world on fire. About to bring them down, blood falls around me and never drown. Underworld visions got these cycles wishing now. Bring around karma, bring them down. They can't stop us once we set this world on fire.
I've been screaming underworld for a long time. O.stylez prepared me for a long grind. UWO, ENT, it's all mine. Cashier in the game, but these haters are long line, all fine. Ball time, passing the rock, get the team in the loop. Hit Twisted Slim, he hit frames and he shoot. Come off the rim, case smash, alley hoop, solid win. We ain't gotta reach for the game, cause we got it pinned. Set the world on fire, who asking? It's gotta be them, and after this world get finished burning, underworld begins. They can't stop us once we set this world on fire, on fire. Please believe underworld we rise. We setting this world on fire. I do not think you're gonna last. We gon' let these bitches
About to bring them down, blood falls around me and never drown. Underworld visions got these cycles wishing now. Bring around karma, bring them down. They can't stop us once we set this world on fire. About to bring them down, blood falls around me and never drown. Underworld visions got these cycles wishing now. Bring around karma, bring them down. They can't stop us once we set this world on fire.
Real shit, I'm a real nigga and I can't change. Start doing this rap shit, now people know my fucking name. Some of my niggas turn them bitches, lot of shit done changed. To get a victory, nigga, you gotta deal with pain. Respect, my daddy told me give to receive. I stay on my grind, hella shit to achieve. Believe in my faith, I'm finna make it out the streets. But the streets won't let me go, well shit, that's all I know. Yeah, I'm sticking by the code and I can never change up. No, lean got me moving slow just like a change up. Feds interrogating, nigga, I ain't saying nothing. Niggas sending threats, but I ain't worried about nothing. Real shit, all I need is me and that's on me. That's on me. Underworld officials, TBG. I'm your friends, y'all let me free. Yeah, let me breathe, let me breathe.
Bring them down, blood falls around me and never drown. Underworld visions got these cycles wishing now. Bring around karma, bring them down. They can't stop us once we set this world on fire. About to bring them down, blood falls around me and never drown.
Yeah. Your boy K Smash. Black lives matter everywhere. Not just here in the USA, you dig?
ENT's a must. protect and serve the community. How you protect and serve when you shooting me. Seem like we going faster.
R.I.P.
And that's why Black Lives Matter.
Y'all not dying in vain. We standing up for y'all for real.
I don't resist, but I still get a need. It's becoming a disaster. And that's why Black Lives Matter.
I was selling CDs by the corner store. An everyday hustle, it was a struggle trying to get them off. Cops on my ass, in the flash, I'm face on the floor. Knees in my back, I'm trying to tussle, trying to get them off. Turn around, I'm on the ground like what you arresting me for. Stop resisting, but I was not resisting no more. No weapon, cop draws his gun, no protection, no time to run, no last time to see my son. Gun pressed against my chest, a vest I really needed one. Tilt my head to the sky like you might be receiving one. Black Lives Matter, but please don't let me be an easy one. I was murdered in cold blood, but justice, we get it done. Took me at a young age, unity, we needed some.
Serve the community. How you protect and serve when you shooting me. Seem like we going faster. And that's why Black Lives Matter. Hands up, but you still shooting me. I don't resist, but I still get a need. It's becoming a disaster. And that's why Black Lives Matter.
Birthday right around the corner. Gotta get a fresh cut. Wife and daughter still sleep. I guess it's time to wake them up. Get to the shop. You know me, I gotta leave fresh as fuck. Get in the car, let's buckle up. Cause safety is a must. We on the road, it's all labs. Slightly pushing on the gas. I use my signal just to pass. Look in the rear view. See the cops on my ass. Lights come on. I pull over to the shoulder. License in my back pocket. Gun sitting in my holster. I know how to stay calm. Reaching for my license really got me shot in the arm. Bullet spins, it goes through while it's collapsing my lung. Seatbelt in place, my body numb. I'm scared and my breath is gone. Skin color makes me strong. I'm dead for doing no wrong. My constitutional right said I can bear arms. Now there is no wrong. Now there's no order in this order. This cop shot me in front of my girl and my daughter.
Protect and serve the community. How you protect and serve when you shooting me. Seem like we going faster. And that's why Black Lives Matter. Hands up, but you still shooting me. I don't resist, but I still get a need. It's becoming a disaster. And that's why Black Lives Matter.
We are now entering a revolution. For all y'all out there that see what's going on. You see what we see. You feel how we feel. We realize all lives do matter. This is true. We're speaking on those that we're seeing every day, that we're losing at an alarming rate through the police brutality. We are now entering a revolution. For all y'all out there that can't do something, say something. We are here for you. This is the underworld. Shouts to everybody riding with this movement. Let's help make this movement spread like a virus.
You are my way. See you looking from far away. Cause I'm on my grind all day. Really nothing else to say. But sorry, keep riding my way. My chances I can have all day. Chilling on this block all day. You could leave it, you could stay. But sorry, keep riding.
This wax is spiffy, shoot it on with me. If she piffy with me, leaving with me. She won't forget me, gentlemen like Farnsworth Bentley. Underground king, run the industry, know the city. This my city, brick city. Forgive me, I run shit. It's him hogging on the hot chick. You know they love good. Yo, I got you, have you won? It's nothing. I ain't stunting, I'm fronting. We about to get blunted. I'ma put something in your stomach. Can you catch that? Can you catch that? I'ma smash that kitty cat, front to back, ass smack, all that. We can toss some bread, roll around the bed, break that ass off at the office instead. She rather give me head, she wanna ride my way to the dead.
but shawty came around my way. It's just like an hour, yeah. Chillin' on this block all day. You could leave or you could stay. Shawty came
This wave could kill you. Should place this face on $1 million bill. You could place this face among trappers and shrill. This chick all on my grill. This chick wanna test a skill. This chick wanna cop a fill. Trying to see how the insides feel. Yo, my rib shots hit spots you did not even know was there. Get grizzly as a bear with them legs in the air. Shake the chandelier. We could wait the hemisphere and still don't care. I could take you everywhere and go nowhere, but I gotta hit the block. I got to show those there. For sure, I'ma blow this. Yeah, my fault I'm all hyped up. I got it in your head. I'm not a millionaire, but if you're there when I'm there, you can ride my wave out of here like the leg.
See you looking from far away. Cause the more I grind all day, really nothing else to say. But shawty came around my way. My ships is stacking out all day. Chillin' on this block all day. You could leave or you could stay.
DJ J Million, sound like money, baby.
Talking nasty like some more, so I shut the engine off, get out. To her to close the door as they walk into my house. She getting freaky like a whore. I'ma tear that kitty up, turn that pussy
Slowly for
out.
the sexy women out there, the sexy ladies out there, let's get them leave.
I'll take you, but I know that you've been needing, but I'm giving you to open up your legs. Toss them on my shoulder. I'ma keep you up all night, cause like a couple soldiers. Niggas just a number, even though you're older. I'ma rock your body like I'm rocking
Bring
out
that
the
shit
motor.
back.
Get baby girl, and I'ma show you how. I'ma rock your body like I'm rocking out the motor. See you looking from far away. Cause the more I grind all day, really nothing else to say. But shawty came around my way. My chances stacking out all day. Chillin' on this block all day. You could leave or you could stay. But shawty came around my way.
Had to bring that wave back, smooth it out real quick for y'all O.stylez style. You know how we do. My man Nick is that. Just for all my online friends out there, Facebook, Twitter, tag.com, all that old good shit. Yo, Nick, tell me what you were saying.
And if you didn't get it, baby girl, I'ma show you how. I'ma rock your body like the Rocky Mountain boulders.
I guess that says it all. It's your boy O.stylez back for y'all, man. We going in. I'm the JFK of Jersey, if you didn't know. CEO of Underground ENT, the motherfucking avatar of hip-hop.
I'm here grinding, doing what I do, what I do. Say it's my timing. I really don't need you. I really don't need you. So don't tell me nothing about what you do, what you do. Cause I'm not hearing nothing. My team will never lose, never lose. Look at everything I do, and I did it all by myself, by myself. Look at everything I do, and I did it all by myself, by myself. Oh, stop what you did, and you ain't need no help, ain't need no help. And this is a life you live. See you with a underworld, underworld. This is what he did. Put together all types of talent. They smash prices, twisted, slamming frames hang on. Walking and follow my dreams. It's bigger than we see. Than we see. I'm looking at everything I do. And I did it all by myself. By myself. But look at everything I do. And I did it all by myself. By myself. Look at everything I do. And I did it all by myself. By myself. But look at everything I do. And I did it all by myself. By myself. Trying to give a helping hand. Somehow it falls back on me. But still I'll be the man. With or without you, friends don't mean. As long as I got a family, it is what it is. Can't stop this. Cause everything that I do it just to live for me and my kids. But look at everything I do, and I did it all by myself, by myself. But look at everything I do, and I did it all by myself, by myself. Look at everything I do, and I did it all by myself, by myself. Look at everything I do, and I did it all by myself, by myself.
Try to be a gentleman, but it's about to get gangsta. Try to be a gentleman, but I'm about to get gangsta. Try to be a gentleman, but I'm about to get gangsta. Watch it all fall, watch it all fall down. Smash from Orlando, Rhino came from Jersey. I'm more hood if you know what I mean. In Orlando I was wildin', couldn't find a little nigga. Tried to figure out who was robbing on the island. I was styling, getting money without breaking a sweat. Every action got a consequence, a cause and effect. But a nigga kept going, not knowing what was happening next. Two big niggas walked over and they started to flex. I was young and stupid, but was up to the test. A shot to the stomach, worked my way up to the neck. If it's beef, I'll never forget. I made decisions I'll never regret. Once my mind is made up, ain't no turning it back. Got used to robbery, but never fucked with the crack. And since these niggas knew me, I was watching my back. Guard up, quick to attack. I bladed his back, hope he react like. I try to be a gentleman, but it's about to get gangsta. I try to be a gentleman, but I'm about to get gangsta. I try to be a gentleman, but I'm about to get gangsta. Watch it all fall, watch it all fall down. Anybody can shoot, that's the way I was raised. So I'm beating your ass before pulling my blade. In Jersey, I had rage, now I'm flipping the page. It's underworld. Put that on my grave. My task is to bring y'all niggas force. That's after I rage. No cops in my camps, that's the way that it's played. I'm shooting to hit you, I'm not shooting to graze. In my hood, I hold it down. Williamsboro, New Jerusalem is the name of my town. Let a nigga act a fool and I'm putting him down. Run your lips about my hood, you go under the ground. No sound, only noise that you hear is when the body is found. I go in and I do what I want. You do what you allow. Rhino speaks, take you out to sneak. You find me in your house, snipe your spouse for running your mouth. I'm a G, niggas know what I'm about. Let it go now. I try to be a gentleman, but it's about to get gangsta. I try to be a gentleman, but I'm about to get gangsta. I try to be a gentleman, but I'm about to get gangsta. Watch it all fall, watch it all fall down. Never snitch on my niggas and I live by the code. paved my own path and I follow that road. Pop first, no questions, that's the way I was told. Empty the whole clip, now it's time to reload. I spit bars of gold and I gotta stay humble. Keep my boots strapped just in case I gotta rumble. Even if I get hit, no way that I can stumble. Take a hit to give a hit and watch the bones fumble. Take his tongue up out his mouth. Now all he do is mumble. High kick to the head can make the skull crumble. I got bullets so when it's beef, you get them in the bundle. I do what you want to and let my niggas hunt you. Take my kindness for weakness if you want to. I cock back and I'll show you what the gun do. Bullets to the head, leave him dead. Have his floor painted red. Guess this guy wants you, motherfucker. I try to be a gentleman, but it's about to get gangster. Try to be a gentleman, but I'm about to get gangster. Try to be a gentleman, but I'm about to get gangster. Watch it all fall, watch it all fall down.
SoundCloud violence.
Like us, no you can't. Gain trust to move it like us. Yes I can. No way you can do what we do. No you can't. Be true and always be true. Yes I can. Can you flow? No you can't. Blaze the drum. Yes I can. Save a show. No you can't. Face a foe. Yes I can. Kill a beat. No you can't. Run your street. Yes I can. Bring defeat. No you can't. Bring the heat. Yes I can.
Nigga, I'll be damned if you ever test my fan.
No you can't.
Watch me spin the man.
Like you fucking spin the fan.
Yes I
You
can.
little and just think you can test my underclan.
No you can't.
KS flow, stop the show like these niggas
Yes,
got
I can.
banned. Duplicate this underworld, put you under the
Yes, I
world.
can.
Go ahead, try.
No, you
Got the
can't.
bullet sped
Yes,
by.
I can.
You trying to clone my oath to cheer for yo.
Whoa, no you can't.
Crush a motherfucker, I flow back
Yes, I
into slow.
can.
Understand you don't understand this flow.
No, you
I can
can't.
elevate a man, find over his torso.
Yes, I can.
None fuck with us.
No, you
I cop
can't.
back bust.
Yes I can. No you
Cause
can't.
people believe
Yes, I
travel
can.
coast to coast, look the hood and be good.
No, you
I can
can't.
start a movement in your own hood.
Really
Yes I
think
can. You'll never do it like us. No you can't. Gain trust to move it like us. Yes I can. No way you can do what we do. No you can't. Be true and always be true. Yes I can. Can you flow? No you can't. Blaze the drum. Yes I can. Save a show. No you can't. Face a foe. Yes I can. Kill a beat. No you can't. Run your street. Yes I can. Bring defeat. No you can't. Bring the heat. Yes I can.
Underworld's my clan and understand you'll never take us down.
No you can't.
I can give you somewhere that you never found.
Yes I can.
You cannot make me believe you not a clown.
No you
You
can't.
can't handle smoke, I'm choking on a pound.
Yes I can.
Can you flow?
No you can't.
Big foes.
Yes I
You
can.
can't get it.
No you
Cause I
can't.
forbid it. You cannot go to the places that I be.
No you can't.
I changed time, put BC between AD.
Yes I can.
You could never take the underworld from me.
No you
But
can't.
underworld can take you out without a fee.
Yes I can.
Can you win?
No you
I
can't.
break men.
Yes I can.
Will you survive?
No,
I
you
leave them
can't.
quaking.
Yes, I can.
Now the pain you give could leave me aching.
No you
No,
can't.
I'm gonna send you to the man that make men.
Yes I can. You'll never do it like us. No you can't. Gain trust to move it like us. Yes I can. No way you can do what we do. No you can't. Be true and always be true. Yes I can. Can you flow? No you can't. Blaze the drum. Yes I can. Save a show. No you can't. Face a foe. Yes I can. Kill a beat. No you can't. Run your street. Yes I can. Bring defeat. No you can't. Bring the heat. Yes I can.
You can't fuck with this rap god. Don't get amp, I put my stamp when I attack y'all. And you the man but can't compare to my attack dog. Ride that cliff up blindfold and make you back off. Get on my level, he can't scream, make sure nobody help. You can't be pussy but play thug at the same time. Battle rap, I killed that nigga with the same line. Oh, you a vet but can't compare to my weak rhymes. All them goons, they pop up around sleep time. Play me sweet, I play to keep. Affect the streets, permanent sleep.
Nigga, you can't even show a face.
CEO, UWO, I call call my clan.
Yes, I can. Never do it like us. No, you can't. Gain trust to move it like us. Yes, I can. No way you can do what we do. No, you can't. Be true crew and always beat you. Yes, I can. Can you flow? No, you can't. Blaze the drum. Yes, I can. Save a show. No, you can't. Face a foe. Yes, I can. Kill a beat. No, you can't. Run your street. Yes, I can. Bring defeat. No, you can't. Bring the heat. Yes, I can.
It's kind of hard living this life I live. I'm out here trying to get this paper to feed my wife and my family, you know what I'm saying? But I just don't seem to be able to make it happen. I don't know, man. I just don't know. Hard to make it in this mindset. Solitude.
No solutions for solitude. Do what I gotta do. Use who I gotta use to move where I gotta move. But the pain's much more than I can take. Isolated and the weight on my plate is too great. No solutions for solitude. Do what I gotta do. Use who I gotta use to move where I gotta move. But the pain's much more than I can take. Isolated and the weight on my plate is too great.
Again, a damn thing heal me. I'm really about to have to do something silly. Life got my heart chilly. I was such a good guy. If I could cry, I would try. Ain't gon' lie. Solitude got me in a bad mood. I barely even have food. Weighing 132. My clothes dirty too. Hoes don't understand. Say they want a good man, yeah, won't lend a hand. Damn, this shit's crazy. I know I'm not lazy, but these jobs pay me like allowance to a baby. Baby mom's the only answer. I'm getting shitted on like Pampers. Niggas disrespecting me like dancers. Stress got me smoking like I'm hoping for cancer. Calm down, just put the bomb down. Cause if I blow up, then I'll never blow down. My life is profound, my feet hold no ground. It's about to go down and I can't control it, can't hold it. My brain molded and coded with old shit. And the new shit is worse. I probably welcome a hearse, but I need the fame first.
No solutions for solitude. Do what I gotta do. Use who I gotta use to move where I gotta move. But the pain's much more than I can take. Isolated and the weight on my plate is too great. No solutions for solitude. Do what I gotta do. Use who I gotta use to move where I gotta move. But the pain's much more than I can take. Isolated and the weight on my plate is too great.
Surrounded by four corners, the pen's my only friend. I'm in my own world while the walls are closing in. I can't win. Cause time after time, my mind's intertwined. When opposing forces are combined in line. My plateau is that of positivity. No time for negativity, so I just let it be. Indeed, the evil spirit is in the flesh, so it's my duty. The journey on a quest to the crest. With problems on my hands now, I'm a soldier. Waiting on my breaks and I'm getting older. I got plans for grants and a massive wealth. Protecting my seeds first and protect myself. Chain smoking, black and miles, and cold got me locked. Stress on my chest make it hard to stop. I had a 9 to 5 and just to stay on top, I take breaks and meditate on hip hop. So when my shit drop and make my situation flip flop, shows on the road collecting dough to rip shop. Yeah, I want ends, ain't no need to pretend. No more sitting with my hand out, depending on friends. What's more, I'm getting thin, time to stand on my own. While my wife keeps telling me it's time to call Tyrone. She's on some next shit, I call it a throne. And now I'm all alone in the zone. Solitude.
No solutions for solitude. Do what I gotta do. Use who I gotta use to move where I gotta move. But the pain's much more than I can take. Isolated and the weight on my plate is too great. No solutions for solitude. Do what I gotta do. Use who I gotta use to move where I gotta move. But the pain's much more than I can take. Isolated and the weight on my plate is too great.
Underworld.
This my testimony. Suburban op into crack, but still lonely. This my testimony. Never sold my soul for money, always stayed hungry. This my testimony. I never been for fake phony, but the tape is still on.
I strive to be the best. I step above the press. I strive to be the best. I step above the press. I strive to be the best. I step above the press. I
strive to be the best. This my testimony, had to get this off my chest. I have hustled every day of my life, every day of my life I dealt with pain, heartache, and strife. Decisions dark and light, night and day, too much to talk about, too much to say. If I dare to be the biggest snitch, and NJ got burnt in the fire, face looked like Ghost Rider. Thought at 13, young and would expire by 18. Tired of crackheads, tricks and liars. Brick City the movie, I lived in the wire. By 21, here I come. Wild style gon' set this whole world on fire. Before I retire, be admired. The coast to coast, hood to hood rider. Street unity inspired. I made this underworld shit transpire. Still I rise like Maya, director, editor, and writer. Put this underground shit together like MacGyver. Where's the screwdriver, hammer, nails, and pliers? I built the empire.
This my testimony for all the great we ride for the home. This my testimony, surrounded by fans and crowds, but I'm still lonely. This my testimony, never sold my soul for money, always stay hungry. This my testimony, I never been a fall, fake and phony, but the tape is still on.
I strive to be the best. I step above the rest. I strive to be the best. I step above the rest. I strive to be the best. I step above the rest. I strive to be the best. This my testimony, had to get this off my chest. I done moved all type of rocks through all type of blocks. Suit and tie guys' house while the jocks get served for the guap. Never forget, stab the shop for the guap. For that I thank God a lot. Real rapper, only link with squads that's hot and a lot of not. I gotta speak my mind and testify and rhyme. Every time I spit a line, it's mine from my mind. In real time, I'm on my grind, eating like it's meal time. Let's make a deal time, cause I got some artists about to put them on the market. If you're killing hip hop, you a target. I got a lot of dogs that ain't barking. Up the wrong tree, we be sparking. Million man marching, generals, lieutenant, sergeants. Ride for the cause, cause you're fucking up this culture of ours. And I really mean this, I'ma do this thing till I see Jesus.
This my testimony for all the great we ride for the home. This my testimony, surrounded by fans and crowds, but I'm still lonely. This my testimony, never sold my soul for money, always stay hungry. This my testimony, I never been a fall, fake and phony, but the tape is still on.
I strive to be the best. I step above the rest. I strive to be the best. I step above the rest. I strive to be the best. I step above the rest. I strive to be the best. This my testimony, had to get this off my chest. Turn this shit up. Yeah. Turn my headphones up. Yeah. My nigga KG on the track. My neck about to do it like this. Come on. This that hip hop shit right here, man. I live this shit. I breathe this shit. I bleed this shit. I breathe this shit. Believe this shit. Come on.
Do I live? Breathe hip hop. These are the cats that see hip hop. Hip hop, best to believe. When my clip drop, we gon' spit hop. You gon' make the phone fit pop for hip hop. I live. Breathe hip hop. These are the cats that see hip hop. Hip hop, best to believe. When my clip drop, we gon' spit hop. You gon' make the phone fit pop for hip hop. Yo,
I'm sitting, waiting, praying that it happen. When it gonna happen with this rapping? You know I'm selling blow block strapped in. I'm fast food rapping. That's cruel and cruel for you to do. So what happened? Hold my head up. Cause that's what that nigga said. Pull that leg with the infrared from under the bed. That's what that trigger said. You know this nigga fed. Sit like a liquor head. Tell your bitch to lick her head. Yo, I'm sick of feds. That's why my nigga dead. They had to fuck with the dread. Want me dead? Mess with my girls or my brother cat. That'll push me off another ledge. And I'm already at the damn edge. Trim your fucking heads, friend. For messing with my brethren. That's a belly flop. Drop dead set. I won't give a fuck if a friend holds me. I'ma still leave these niggas holy. And no one that knows me can console me. Cause saying would control me. Only and solely. Too great for me to live like a phony. You don't know me, homie. That clown that'll back you down with a 4 pound and a sock wrapped around. I smack you down. Read hip hop. These other cats that see hip hop. In a big south, best to believe. When my clip drop, we gon' spit hop. You gon' make the whole fit pop for hip hop. Read hip hop. These other cats that see hip hop. In a big south, best to believe. When my clip drop, we gon' spit hop. You gon' make the whole fit pop. Watch how I supersize my cooking fries. The diesel exercise, extra dies. Guys who think they fly is Clark Kent, but Clark Kent won't get bent when that dark tint is present. I'm shooting gifts and some presents. They ain't so manifesting, cause this for grown men, no adolescents in this section. Get sacked for a sack like a quarterback. Off a half an ounce, I brought a quarterback. The way I slaughter cats like, yo, he order rap. It's an autograph, I bring my border back. Back when East Coast had the boys rap. Now it's like we saw this rap. Get it on if you strap with the scrap if you strap like Velcro. Think I sell slow? Hell no, my clientele sell rain, sleet, or snow. Something brutal, know how I poke coke in the broken nose with dildos. Spit the L flow, then get the boot like a steel toe. I ain't crashing parties, yo, I still show. Read hip hop. These are the cats that see hip hop. In a big south, best to believe. When my clip drop, we gon' spit hop. You gon' make the folk fit pop for hip hop. Read hip hop. These are the cats that see hip hop. In a big south, best to believe. When my clip drop, we gon' spit hop. You gon' make the folk fit pop. Since the 9/11 tragedy, I pray to your majesty. Dear God, what's such a travesty? He said,
"Son, it had to be. They trying to show the world they mad at me. Comes back, you see, 360 degrees.
You better watch for that boomerang. Think they won't do a thing. I let my dick swing, cause I'm down for anything in the brain. Your little nigga shitting doubt it. Cause Silk and Master P ain't the only niggas bout it. Now witness unity like crowded. We spray from Iran to Afghanistan and leave that bitch clouded. No hysteria, United States of America is rerouted. I don't spit real shit, I spout it. And when I feel this when I gotta shout it. I never been a loud kid. Jail time, no bitch. That's what my life is. Think of kids is what the hype is. Believe it or not, we leave spots hot from crack rocks to lead shots to headshots. Brick cities hot, North Phillies, I'm like the vice box. I entice cops, the rugged rapper, jaw tapper jock. No matter what, I never stop this hip hop. Read hip hop. These are the cats that see hip hop. In a big south, best to believe. When my clip drop, we gon' spit hop. You gon' make the whole fit pop for hip hop. Read hip hop. These are the cats that see hip hop. In a big south, best to believe. When my clip drop, we gon' spit hop. You gon' make the whole fit pop for hip hop.
Ripping the ones and twos with the hottest new joints. Coast to coast mixtape DJ.
Let me keep this 100. I'm gonna keep this 100, man. If you ever see that it says freestyle from O.stylez, Just know I just hit record and did that shit, man. I ain't write it or nothing, man.
Yo, the block is sick. This one here is for the bricks. Support the bricks, I make the quick flip. Ice the shit, slice the shit. What you know about putting that rock in the mic, bitch? Y'all all putting that rock in the mic shit. Play, I'm too hype for this. Got these fleas tripping like Peter Griffin fighting the chicken. I ignite when I'm ripping. I just might slip together. Might just bring the $25 clips again. Holla if you're listening. Hustling is infinite. No one's innocent in the Star Wars. I came to open all doors of all haters like Princess Leia. I'm the new Darth Vader. Spark a Vega like a player. Largo trader like the game. Shaking thing. Yeah, I grew up on the wrong side of town. Ghost town, throwdowns and showdowns. Niggas blow rounds, dirty. I rap dirty Jersey. Stepping through dirty Jersey, get done dirty. Be ugly, unjustly. Hip hop ain't dead, these niggas flow rusty. I'm adjusting the malfunctioning Brick City shit. We've been doing this for a little bit, trying to get a little bigger, make a little flip. Shout the lines and you got it moving. Urban this park full of knock shooting. My wig and movement, I'm saluting. Even though Prince is past tense, no PJ today went harder since I'm reminisced the figures. Snitch ass niggas taking pictures, then you wonder why they pull the triggers. Follow Keith out back, meet the feet, I doubt that. We can stop. I got the keys to unlock the block, new combination. My congregation is like a couple nations waiting for confirmation. I tell them stop pacing. Be patient, snitches stop making statements. We make snitches hospital patients, waiting for their awakening. Then we taking it back to war. The fate for those that act like Billy Bathgate. They could try to bite my style, said I left a bad taste. Said that's why you in last place. Got the gas face, we don't talk and knock. I left them with the smash face. Your hate on me is energy, feedback, I need that. Combine it with the weed sack. Yo, hip-hop, I believe that. My rhymes score the most MCs can see that. Flip the page, don't be amazed if you can't read that. JK read rap. Young cats want a couple G's stat, want a couple fleas scratch. I'm catchy, this is that disease rap.
I'm on a whole nother mission. Think of what you risking for you into competition. You don't listen, never missing when I'm spitting these verbal visions that's causing collisions. I get ripping, got me started like ignition. Wishing that my premonition of leaving your limbs sitting in the pool of your own blood and written. I'm not kidding. Put my bid in like prison. Keep insisting and open cans of ass whipping till your back flipping, get hooked like bass fishing. Don't ask questions as if you could keep living. Unanimous decision. So pissed off, I'm still pissing. You ain't biting, you hissing. Give you a shaky hand incision. Blind barber clipping. Blood Jericho dripping. The way I'm hitting, it's like something was hitting in my mid. So forbidden. You know I'm sickening the way I'm kicking them. Neo recognition, I'm the one, son, you cringing. If beats don't heat like an engine, I go through withdrawal like I'm binging. Give me binging Yo, get stuff like vaccinations. Any hesitation will lead to evacuation. Think of what you facing, we stand tall like innovation. How you keep on hating, then start running like you racing. Since you on the trial like you got wild on the patient. Guns be blazing, leave no fingerprints for tracing. No trace dudes like Wally without the complication. Transformation, who's banner radiation. Nations waiting, detonation, devastation. We underground like down below your basement. Lifting off your feet until you meet top aviation. Zoning when I'm born and gives me cigarette temptation. Demonstrating how I got hot like bacon. Just still bacon. Pain sensation like child making. Swing like Spider-Man, that's amazing. Meteors and things in my exterior containment. Replacing thoughts with rhymes with minds vacant. Breaking jaws and walls shaking. Making you change your destination to a suburb location. We answer foes when they provoking. Think of why you choking when you never started smoking. You still hoping that I'm finished getting open. No scoping targets cause the heart is not approaching. Voting for removal, you do not want me emotional. Toasting victories, my promotion got me boasting. Posting caution, oceans cold as oceans. Treasure frozen. Roller coaster on your cold until it's swollen. You use your head for bowling, remote controlling, stolen missions for exporting tissues to think I'm holding. Never miss your body folding. Damn, I thought I told him. Hurts like blows to your scrotum. Worldwide like modems, top of the totem. Record coding, rolling like Stephen Hawking, holding his knees. Got my funk and cheese molded. Nancy skis poking. Talking slow like locomotion. Throw blows at your gut till you up throwing. Going anger with no danger showing. Risking like acid, lotion past joking. Crack the cast open with your abs half broken. Now you freeze like you posing. I'ma lift you like you floating. Hit you like ghosts is the chosen disposal.
We speak the blues in these stages, we use it, that is the conclusion. Physical transfusion, we speak the blues in these stages, we use it, that is the conclusion. Physical we speak the blues in these stages, we use it, that is the
I try to get a clue. If they with you, then they could get it too. Your crew is and you are your clan is and your man's a no, whenever we decide to come around, our commercial take you all back underground. You ain't Mary J, but damn it, I must say, this ain't rare to us, we do this every day. And while you down there, better bend your head and pray. Not that it matters, I'm gon' do this anyway. It's bad enough, y'all took the hip-hop from my world, but now you acting like a gangster, yet you singing like a girl. You throwing down like boats with holes in holes. Take all you got and then I spend it on some clothes. And I don't mean you're going down for a little while. You going down so long when you wake up, your life is out of style. And when you're going down, you're never going up. I'm fighting titans, you scrapping with Scooby Plug. Somebody left the latch off the cage. Now I clean up after you give me a Minute Maid. I'm hungry like I'm never getting paid. If you was down and that is where you should have stayed. Don't be around when we touch the ground. Don't make a sound or else you might get found. If I was you, I'd try to get a clue. If they with you, then they could get it too. Your crew is and you are your clan is and your man's a no, whenever we decide to come around, our commercial take you all back underground. If you on top, I hope you got a parachute. I told this chick her nails was nice and hair was cute. She going down. My own horn is something I don't care to chew, but I swear that I'm so hot it's like I'm wearing 20 suits. You got it all, but all you got ain't stopping me. I fight a termite that's bites in my property. If you're gonna do, then you wanna do it properly. My intelligence dropping to philosophy to Socrates. Why is evil mocking me? It softly just copies me. Every lemon chopped from me makes me react so shockingly. This is not what you want. Since I got a lot of back, I don't front. I'm in the game, it's no shame, I never played. If you was down in that, it's where you should have stayed. Don't be around when we touch the ground. Don't make a sound or else you might get found. If I was you, I'd try to get a clue. If they with you, then they could get it too. Your crew is and you are your clan is and your man's a no, whenever we decide to come around, our commercial take you all back underground.
classic shit, man. This is over 20 years worth of good music coming from my squad. Definitely helped me branch off this underworld movement I got going right now in this current state. This is what we was doing back in the day when we was trying to do our thing in the game. Shouts to my squad, man. Shouts to my SUK fam. SUK stick up kids. Let's go.
Yeah. It's Ocean Style. Yeah. And it's the track. Hustle hard or die now. It's a lot of things you gotta know about this. Stay focused. It ain't about just pushing on the block. It's about what you do. It's all about you when you grind. It's my sign, y'all. They call me Mr. 24/7, 365. A hot boy snowman. Push those pies. Push them right up the curb till they need a supply. Just have to keep some feet and have them leaning to the side. They say streets so watch it to watch me hard. Pitching, WC, they hand money and raw. The cops that come by, guns pointing at you. One day I'ma snatch, I'll be watching you guys. Middle finger pointing back, hell if I see a cell. These plots, these fiends, is how I make bills. It's how I make sales, better than Jordan. Hustling over career, it's more important. Keep eyes on the rise and never be talking. Street secrets when they creep up and have you lost it. It's more like a war and having you costing. Be proud to be loud and never get caught in your trap. Around here, better know where you at. Niggas around here stay strapped. Or get caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Shit around here, we don't play that. That's how a nigga get clapped. Or get caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Caught in the trap.
Hustle hand in hand like hand me that. Rewind me back, remind me that. This game got me strapped. This game got me strapped for the scrap. Pigs and racks, I get clapped in the back. In the show, I'm high off a sack and some cognac. Hustle purses, Zacks, perps and packs, twerk with that. Watch it come back to back for crack like fans came back for real rap. Yo, I got G's pack. Yo, my G's pack follow, man. Got the $12 grands. I'm a scholar with hands. I'm a wallow in fans and goofies that wanna do me for cream. Y'all don't even know what that mean. I hustle t-shirts, kicks, porn flicks, and bootleg jeans. And I got the green. I'ma get paid to sock you. I'ma rock you. Pay to pop you. I'ma cock to on your avenue. Drop you like a red cockatoo. What you wanna do?
Around here, better know where you at. Niggas round here stay strapped. Or get caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Shit around here, we don't play that. That's how a nigga get clapped. Or get caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Hustle man, I honor your hands. How you make sales as fast as you can. Known to watch corners, seek out your plan. Keep minding your money. Street fitted. There's a lot of rules. First one, you don't snitch. Get caught by the law, start hiding your strip. Make it known to these faggots who you trust and believe. Cause the difference got harder who wears it on the sleeve. I see it when they speak, or hear it when they preach. The fair, all fair, it displays when they sleep. You gotta learn and you teach, earn and you keep. You can't keep a chain that has bust in the sleep. It's gonna slow you down. Wanna grow, make it known, and then hold you down. Nigga, they know you now. And every fault that happens comes with mistakes. But what doesn't kill you have you lost in the game? Us around here better know where you at. Niggas around here stay strapped. Or get caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Caught in the trap. Shit around here, we don't play that. That's how a nigga get clapped.
This a DJ Whiteout exclusive.
Get 'em! Let's get 'em! Magician go hard, spin with the veterans. They rockin' jackets, know they're not letterman. All about the council, give me my chatterman. Underworld the team, yeah, we crushing all competitors.
Let's get 'em! Magic, let me get 'em too. And if you already got 'em, let me get 'em after you. It's going down like a frown, I could go around it too. I'm underground but over you, striking like a cobra do. Let's get 'em!
Strong, so much diversity. Rolling with the guys, got me feeling like I'm Hercules. Standing in the booth, smoking on the purple trees. You can find me on the plot of smooth on the ecstasy.
Hit you and the person standing next to you. If my mercy's given, leave you living as a vegetable. You behind like something was in front of you. Your life is done for you. Some battles can be won, but this was not the one for you. Let's get 'em. So hot, I burn calories. You can lose it all, but that's dependent on your salary. Get back like an allergy, value flow first. I turned over a new leaf, but the other side was worse.
Let's get 'em. Ones I'm going hand for. Yes, industry that's under knocking on your damn door. This is our game, underground hip hop. And that's what we stand for.
Stand up, hold up, hold up.
Let's get 'em. You should put your hands up. If you're planning out a war, you should give your plans up. Let's get 'em. Suspected like the dancer. I'm bad at storms, rain and chloroform. Have been forewarned. I pop corns and make your pops mourn. Leave your top torn like hot porn, sharp as rose thorns. Jump the broom just to jump the groom. You were just a cartoon. Gangsta Sailor Moon's about to replay your doom. Let's get 'em. The underground to rise soon. Let's get 'em. Let's get 'em. Magician. Underground. Overground.
Nigga, get up. Call the ambulance for a quick pick up. Trigger hiccups. Get your wig bust. Get your throat slit on your damn wrist cut. This is stick up. Nigga, get up. Call the ambulance for a quick pick up. Trigger hiccups. What? Get your wig bust. Get your throat slit on your damn wrist cut.
Get your neck screwed like Dave Chappelle. Fucking with the stick up in the CPL. Where I be, where I dwell. You love me. I'm money hungry. Like Allen Baby Bundy. You dumb me and money talk. Sucker motherfucker, actress sucker. How I represent them dead presidents across the globe. Back to my residence. With no hesitance, negligence. Just intelligence, sedative, imperative, relevance. Break it down simile, metaphor, compound, pronoun is proud. Freestyle, written down, styles is the wildest. Every beat coincide, ride this. Back off that MC, it's me. If we really enemies to eternity, that ain't concerning me, just turning me. Arsonistic, twisted, ripping, spliffing, sparks, bitch. Now your voice hoarse as a heifer. Bitch ass Mike molester, hollow as a green pepper, one-legged ass stepper. Jersey rapper, blunt nectar, I'm a stacker.
This is stick up. Nigga, get up. Call the ambulance for a quick pick up. Trigger hiccups. Get your wig bust. Get your throat slit on your damn wrist cut. This is stick up. Nigga, get up. Call the ambulance for a quick pick up. Trigger hiccups. Get your wig bust. Get your throat slit on your damn wrist cut.
I stand on mine. Draw a line in the dirt. Cross border and beware, you best prepare for the work. Saying words that hurt, thought you was winning at first. Until your abdomen burst, wasn't prepared for the worst. Now you're thinking you're cursed. Disperse my energy and ministry. If you my enemy, I get dangerous like chemistry. Befriended me, yo CDL, we got another one. Shit is over, son. You better run when this blunt is done. We just work through control too that you ain't heard of. That's my word up. My fingers sticky, you think sorrow. Nobody heard of. You niggas faking in the matrix. You got me stirred up, and I'm heated like some cake mix. I'm certified to be an assassin. Fake defeating concrete. Have you single with Sebastian? I cut off my hands so I can hit you with some ill shit. You feeling so bad? Your baby come out with equipment be evil. Pulling stunts like Knievel. Make your fiance leave you and now she fucking my peoples. And we causing a ruckus. Don't fuzz, kick the bucket. Fuck it, don't matter. These niggas take control. You flat or what?
This is stick up. Nigga, get up. Call the ambulance for a quick pick up. Trigger hiccup. Get your wig bust. Get your throat slit on your damn wrist cut. This is stick up. Nigga, get up. Call the ambulance for a quick pick up. Trigger hiccup. Get your wig bust. Get your throat slit on your damn wrist cut.
I used to beat kids. Now I mistreat the feet kids, not the weak kids. That run for a weak kid. Let's get it over with. Hit with the Range Rover. Bitch, pray to Jehovah. And hope he know you like you supposed to. Things done changed in the game. It's only getting worse. I want to be the last, to be the first. We're hurt, to be in the dirt. Yo, get the fuck back. I'ma cock back the gas to leave you bleeding. Never let your nigga know the pain that he would be receiving. Keep you believing I'm the maddest killer with no fear. Sit behind your forces like your nigga from the rear. I torture innocent souls before I come complete my task. I love to make my victims aftermath of my raps. Now I'm back. Oh, excuse me. Nigga tried to blast me, left to save you in the Uzi.
This is stick up. Nigga, get up. Call the ambulance for a quick pick up. Trigger hiccups. Get your wig bust. Get your throat slit on your damn wrist cut. This is stick up. Nigga, get up. Call the ambulance for a quick pick up. Trigger hiccups. Get your wig bust. Get your throat slit on your damn wrist cut. Nigga, get up.
Stick up. Stick up kids in effect.
Nigga, get up.
Peace out to the killer Dame.
This is stick up.
My nigga Montana Max.
Nigga, get up.
My nigga Wild Star. My brother Crisis. Original Styles back off the MC. What? My CBS. What's up to them guys that start family? Know what I'm saying? Phone up. Brick City. Nigga, get up. Down by LOA Production. Nigga, get up. Mac Beat Studios. Nigga, get up. Niggas getting jacked for the 2000. And world we now. Nigga, get up. It's for all y'all who supposed to be seeing me in the industry. Repeat me. Stick up here. Get up! Guess who's back on the scene? Coming strapped for my team. Make me black for the spring. Let's get him. Yeah, I'm back on the strip. Guess who's back for the hill? Make me clap on you kids. Like this. Yeah, I'm back on top. Make me pop a nigga top. Don't you try to take shots. Big shots at any men. Many men that's on my team. Many men should know what I mean. How? Have seen what I seen. Not too many being where I been. Kinda obscene. Things men to do to get the cream. Many men jukes things. How many crooks locked in the beam? Shot and drop from the beam. Many men say not, you can pop, you go scream. This is not complex index. Many men can't catch my intellect. I said I send many men at your neck. X any men, who's next? Nigga too close. Many of my men hold toast, no butter, no gin. Head butter if the gun jet. Tell Michael Nettle many men felt this program. We don't want to hold it. I got no friends, many of my men is pro heads like.
Sound like money, baby.
Wish that for me.
Guess who's back on the scene? Coming strapped for my team. Make me black for the spring. Let's get him. Yeah, I'm back on the strip. Guess who's back for the hill? Make me clap on you kids. Like this. Yeah, I'm back on top. Make me pop a nigga top. Don't you try to take shit. If you ain't around 30 and from Jersey, many men might have never heard of me. Many men's not worthy to step through the dirty. Then again, many too dirty. I made many men run the derby. Like Jackie joining currency. Many men curse me. Why many men? Wanna verse with a G, converse with me, bang they chat, rip their shirts at me, like they gon' hurt a gat to gat. I rat attach a man to many, give me so many birth with the iron like penny. I'm taking every penny from any man like I'm stingy. I wonder how many, if any man, can't catch my literal. Sometimes it's almost biblical, how I touch so many men to get it, how I touch so many men to.
Wish that for me.
Guess who's back on the scene? Coming strapped for my team. Make me black for the spring. Let's get him. Yeah, I'm back on the strip. Guess who's back for the hill? Make me clap on you kids. Like this. Yeah, I'm back on top. Make me pop a nigga top. You try to take shot. Old style, original style. Many men have one style, but really no style. Why? Only sitting profile. They just itty bitty many men the old style. Original. This track here original. Not many men like old style. Not too many don't like old styles. Many men know old styles will go down. Sign up on the whole crowd. Too many men done bow. Makes me feel proud. How I was allowed to style. Many men and women all around the town. Feel like how I get down. Many men wish that on a G, so I spit. Many runs of niggas that's around me. Underground being me and my crew are many. What's the old styles? Cause he spits like a semi.
Amen. Wish that for me.
DJ J.
You can love me now. You can love me now.
Damn, them niggas beat was oh shit, what get down, nigga? Where the stars at, yo? Them niggas down there, yo. Oh shit.
Gotta love me now. I bet you love me now. You gotta love it. I was conceived in South Jersey, grew up in Brick City. Moving from city to city, life was too shifty. Before I even knew the hell of jail cells, I did biz in hotels. Watching niggas get them dope cells. Here they go, run bell, nigga, hotels. Since a young black male, I lived in the shell. Hell yeah, I can spell. I'd rather rebel, live like, oh well, what the hell, I just fell. By the time I hooked up with my CBL, smoked my first style. I see more drugs than cartels. Watch my pops hit, hammer like nails. Mom is well, gat holding. Rolling and stolen, I met with an explosion, that's well. The homies even tell a little rug rest. Scheming on another brother's hubcats. Take them back, make a few stacks, smoke a few sacks. I'm glad my moms never knew that her life was two track. Come on, and you can love me now.
Don't cry when I leave.
I know you love me now.
I'm always gonna be.
I know you love me now.
When I fly and I leave.
You gotta love me now.
I'm always gonna be.
I know you love me now. You can love me now.
I'm always gonna be.
Bet you love me now.
Don't cry when I leave.
I know you love me now.
scared to die for mine. A little scared to die before my time. A little scared to be devout before I shine. Cause I shine, you shine. I blow your mind out the enzymes ahead of my time all the time. Yet they suggest I pose as a pimp, play a model for jet. Fuck sex, see more breasts than Jerry Springer gets. It's a real vex quest not to be the best. Pass the test and progress to the next contest. Can the contest the concepts I'll interject or inject in this rap set. I'm more than a rap threat. Rap bet, snap next like Bruce Lee when he catch rap. Y'all A&R's half step on the superstar surpass step. Cause he never ever half step. I rap Brick City, NYC, and all my people down in Illy Philly, feel me? I bet you love me now. Don't cry, and you can love me now. I'm always gonna be. I bet you love me now. When I fly and love me. I know you love me now. I'm always gonna be. I gotta get your hands out. And you can love me now. I'm always gonna be. I bet you love me now. I know you love me now. I'm always gonna be. No longer a child running wild. No more wild style with the crooked smile. Mama, look at now. I done grown to a strong black man. And mom, can you understand? I couldn't comprehend the message you was saying. Cause you was high sipping gin, living in the world of sin. I ain't even gonna do an Eminem and pretend like you was like the rest of them. You truly got it in your condition, no end. Raised for a strong kid. Some of my friends, some of your friends showed love to the twins like your own kid. And I never ever knew how you do it. I only got two and look at me, mom. Yo, I'm going through it. Sometimes I think I blew it. I don't know what to do with it, so I spit it in lyrics. I pray they never speak to you in spirit. That but the truest woman in my world never can hear it. That's like the only thing I'm fearing. Come on, I bet you love me now. Don't cry when I read. You can love me now. I'm always gonna be. I bet you love me now. When I fly and I read. I know you love me now. I'm always gonna be. Gotta get your hands up high when I read. You can love me now. I'm always gonna be. You can love me now. Don't cry when I read. Yeah. I'm always gonna be. What a rap guy spit what you feeling. By the cards you got dealing. While it's hard to make some millions of the games steady building. Black men, love your children. Stop illin'. Let's rob and it's stealing for you minor class villains. And gangsters that spit. Gotta spit what I spit. After this is blasphemous. Turn again to activist. Had them people mad as ish. I had my people glad as ish. And you know I had to spit cause I'm different. Let me differentiate. Definition demonstrate. Get them demons straight cause you can never ever take. What took the Lord so long to make? Why do we tolerate hate? When they infiltrate we sit and hesitate. Sit still, yellow niggas drill. I'm just being real. All you players play the fifth. If you wanna flex your skills, put them dollar bills. Holla, if not, I'm a rider still. Never follow Jack or Jill up no damn.
UW Road 500 gang. Raw, uncut. There ain't nothing but gorillas in here. Dig? Fuck designer and fuck future.
From the streets.
And that's real talk.
Hood nigga, fuck a
Your boy
panda. I was born
Smash.
and raised gorilla from the streets. Hood nigga.
Yeah.
Fuck a panda. I was born and raised gorilla.
I'm hungry, best believe I'ma eat in these streets. You'll die over what you believe. Your right hand ain't your man. He really a creep. He won't hit you while you awake, only attack when you sleep. He's nervous, he keep checking his pulse. His heart done double the beat. The first option is to flee, but the respect he would get if he buried the G. Initiation, he impatient, gotta hurry back. He got these niggas waiting, no more time to think. Cock it back and start the blaze, and every shot land right on his top. Now that's amazing, headshot, shrivel straight to the brain, just like a raisin. And when shit get hot on the block, we call it Cajun. Got bullets with no names to change the game. When I'm blazing, I'm the man, I bring pain, and it's kinda hard to face them. Tracks untraceable, nigga, and I call that 38 'em. Snub nose, get special on niggas in case they hatin'. Yeah.
Hood nigga, fuck a panda. I was born and raised gorilla from the streets. Hood nigga, fuck a panda. I was born and raised gorilla.
A young nigga packing them hammers. I'm living like Tony Montana. A fuck nigga done with the Anna. Them problems that you cannot handle. I swear that the click go bananas. I bust and skeet off in the phantom. I'm sipping my lean with the fanta and wrap up the cup with a bloody bandana. I'm chasing the money the gutter way. The way that I live ain't no other way. I'm rocking more chains than a fucking slave. If you test a nigga, I'ma get an A. I might traffic work on the interstate. Rihanna for money, I want the cake. Don't fuck with these niggas, cause niggas fake. SCG, that bitch better know a place. Bitch, I be going gorillas. Got zip on my jacket like Michael and Thriller. Never been a pussy, rather be killer. So fuck all these rappers, consider me iller. If you're paying nigga, you would get murdered. Just another nigga that we ain't heard of. Swagger jacket, nigga, boy, you ain't worth it. I am a bully and you looking nerdy. Hey, boy, you biting and shit. Boy, get off of his dick. That's for the bitches. You probably taking some dick and drooling all on that shit. Just for the bitches. You ain't packing no heat. Pie ass nigga too sweet. I see what you got. How you screaming and why, rapping and why, and sounding like you from the South, nigga.
Hood nigga, fuck a panda. I was born and raised gorilla from the streets. Hood nigga, fuck a panda. I was born and raised gorilla.
Ew. Gorilla, watch me beat on my chest. It's Underworld 500. Then dispose of the rest. You wear a vest, I got this iron. And you're sure to get pressed. Now give me your cause. It's guaranteed you feel the effects. Now who's next? I got these niggas starting to build up a sweat. Hands down, I'm one of the best with no debating. Just shot a man down with one to the chest. He just got sanctioned. Reload 6 more shots and then I spin the chamber. You don't see your future when your life is in danger. Stick up kid, I'm a grinder. Shoot lean all the way back like a recliner. This DE will knock the DE off a designer and have your family use a milk carton just to find you. Bullets on the back of your thoughts like a reminder. Move with a pack when the gorillas is behind you. Killing niggas, and I been a gorilla nigga. That Skrilla nigga, I shoot caps, pillar nigga.
Streets. Hood nigga, fuck a panda. I was born and raised gorilla from the streets. Hood nigga, fuck a panda. I was born.
So wait, the same block said you live on, the God's okay. Fuck lawyers, I rob with the case. Pay the judge under the table with money and supply to the way. Niggas better get the bribery straight or say a little pocket money and get the hell out of the state. Cause if you start that you wanna apply to the J, find your body get thrown up the fire escape. Ocean nominated for Boss City, yeah, for leaving niggas trauma say kids get tossed to the air. Grim Reaper, wood dark in your fist. It be that dumper to your face or the hawk to your ears. Who wanna walk cause the feds is out? Just step over the line and I'ma make sure I'ma air you out. Not only will I declare you out, but that pussy round will put your whole peers in doubt.
Y'all niggas ain't fuck with us. Y'all niggas ain't fucking with us. Y'all niggas can't fuck with us. Get your mind right, get your mind right. Y'all niggas can't fuck with us. Y'all niggas ain't fucking with ain't nobody us. Y'all niggas can't fuck with us. Get your mind right, get your mind right.
That niggas fake, so I'm bringing that fire to squad. You learn the streets, sit down from the wire. Ours that come from Melrose Place, Rapid Dawson Street. Come to your hood with the Mac to lift you off of your feet. That nigga say that you're real, but you kinda soft. Posing like bitches, but spitting like they rhymes are soft. Fuck your hood, or what type your law? We the real motherfucker, y'all some kind of fraud. I'd rather you bring your nigga instead of dying alone. It gives me the pleasure, keep on finding the chrome. Cause I swear, if I catch you, I'm dividing your dome. The doc's defense, go see what size is blown. We here, y'all niggas can't never ignore us. We reppin' the real as you heard in the cause better. Give us respect, you know that we mean well. Kept bullets stuck in your chest, keep spinning, let's be well.
Y'all niggas can't fuck with us. Y'all niggas ain't fucking with us. Y'all niggas can't fuck with us. Get your mind right, get your mind right. Y'all niggas can't fuck with us. Y'all niggas ain't fucking with us. Y'all niggas can't fuck with us. Get your mind right, get your mind right.
Inconsistent will be ambition. Y'all the slugs on the floor, we ain't deep ammunition. No, we ain't friends, but except to be enemies. Get slapped up in your collar, then the JF Kennedy. Loud niggas, go on and ask around. Bitch made puddles, you looking at some basket hell. Better duck when I blast these valves. You get clapped and your kids being bastards now. Even the cops can't fuck with the squad, cause we
bars. Like a teacher with their hand in a chalk. Fairy tale niggas spitting like them Hallmark cars. Be spitting on niggas just to get nice with the law. I'ma show you true to life for these bars. We the real of the real, the labels true to life of the war.
Y'all niggas can't fuck with us, no. Y'all niggas ain't fucking with us, no, no. Y'all niggas can't fuck with us, no. Get your mind right, get your mind right. It's the real baby, it's the real baby, it's the real baby. Ooh, no.
The underworld. Take my hand, lead me on. Follow me into the underworld. Take my hand, lead me on. You are now in the underworld. Oh, and on a long journey. Take my hand, lead me on. All my riders shout underworld, 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 underworld. All my real riders shout underworld, underworld. As I sit and smoke on this cig, I think about when I was a kid trying to do it big, trying to be in them streets. Now underworld is how a nigga eat, never meet defeat, always stand on my feet. When niggas try to compete, the niggas straight get beat on the concrete. You fuck around with that nigga Keith, aka O.stylez, just to be brief. A nigga straight knock out your teeth if you fucking with my fleet while my fleet trying to eat. I just do what I does, cause the founder of the shit bring the buzz. Shouts to all my thugs. Love is love, niggas in the street trying to grind hard. Catch me on the boulevard, chilling with my squad. It's underworld for life, bitch. Fuck with this shit, you might get rich, that's some real shit. Lead me on. I'm on my way to the underworld. Take my hand, lead me on. Salutes to the underworld. Take my hand, lead me on. Follow me into the underworld. Take my hand, lead me on. You are now in the underworld. I give shots and salutes to everybody here. If you're not here, I really don't care. You niggas best beware. I got dogs every fucking where, and them niggas ain't scared. Yeah, butts a couple shots in the air, going through your hair as it breathes, then you dead. Took a couple shots in your head, we ain't aiming for your leg. You playing with the bread like the motherfucking feds. And you can never join this movement, because we move and got no time for bullshit. You better get up on your job, niggas, shouting underworld when I rob niggas. This is how I find niggas. Like come outside, niggas. You wanna collide, niggas? Fuck a drive-by, nigga. I can send your ass to the fucking sky, niggas. Then you be a real fly, nigga. This is underworld. Take my hand, lead me on. I'm on my way to the underworld. Take my hand, lead me on. Salutes to the underworld. Take my hand, lead me on. Follow me into the underworld. Take my hand, lead me on. You are now in the underworld. Oh, and on a long journey. Take my hand, lead me on. All my riders shout underworld, 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 underworld. All my real riders shout underworld, underworld.
Shit, man. This is CEO of the Real Entertainment. DRE with 2 dots in between, don't get it confused. We up in Back Sound Productions right now. My man KG on the boards. My man Big O in the studio. You know what I mean? The Real Entertainment, DRE, the Realest MC. Holla! Yeah. On this type of beat, I gotta talk reckless. We took over in J, we about to take over Texas. When niggas start hearing these records, they gon' say I ripped it with precision and that nigga just wrecked this. Yes, it's the boy who's no stranger. Linked up with the kid from the home of the Long Ranger. Just several niggas on the same track who flow danger. The real pretty thugs collab, a known banger. They say everything's big in Texas, so they come to the east and see how big our Texas. And niggas try to come out the box with it. Best believe we gon' take it to the block just like the Locks did it. Just in case niggas don't know who this be, it's that dude from MJ known as the realest MC. And in case my name pop on the screen, don't confuse it with them. I'm DRE with 2 dots in between, motherfuckers.
Let's get back to focus, yeah. Mr. CEO, himself, O.stylez, yeah. Black sounds, come on, we about to hurt. Listen, what? I don't think you can make it with a push of a hand. If a nigga gave it a hope and lead you his pants, sat down, B-sided, highlighted the plans. You would still mess up the one that's snitching your mans. I ain't gotta lie, but fuck it, I see your weakness. I can't give you that answer, no, will I repeat it? It's not me, you lost to begin with. No family involved, you stuck with no friendship. Plus they know you, no way can you end it. That looks around the corner, you at the top of the endless. If you make me lose money, come back with the loose change. The tool that I bought and reroute your brains. That's it, the show is over. Nigga, you's a no soldier. The hoes know you. Nigga, I would toast you. I would roast you. Leave you in a ditch. Get your mom's in the face and she made you a bitch.
Yeah, I know we was here, right? We here. It's all real. How that fake shit is out the door, man. It's the real ENT. Smack y'all bitch niggas. What? Brick City, nigga. What? Who next? To get that ass red like stop sign. Pop time. Two of the fucked up and I got mine. This ain't rap. I have that ass caught in the trap and I ain't even talking crap. Nigga, relax before I relapse like Mad Max. Max Payne, bustin' shots like that game. Do you not? See you hot as a flame to Mary Jane. I do the same thing again and again. The real ain't a game, and we really ain't playing with y'all. None of them. I have your men seeing bright lights like Gremlin. You can survive or live the rest of your life trembling. That's why most run across the coast like Wimbledon. The hottest gentleman, spitting encore since Eminem. Smut these hoes who pretend to be. Start accident when I'm into it. Let's just get it in. Yo, I'm down with that like I'm down with rap. I'm down with cats to snap and clapping rats. We packing packs. It's dirty Jersey rolling 30. 330, rocking 30 Jersey. Did them dirty, dig them dirty. For certain, it's curtains. I call whirlwinds like Merlin. Have your picture twisting and turning, freezing and burning, coughing, sneezing and earling. Yo, I'm sick as your last girlfriend. Man, fuck rocking ice. Yo, I'm still rocking stuff.
Body of a model, independent, do what you gotta do. I see you looking from a distance. In my mind, I'm steady thinking. She bad in the motherfucker. 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 Oh, you bad, sitting over there. Trying to talk, I see that you're scared. Shy as fuck, that's what I'm saying. With my game, like you know how I do this. It's on this. Now watch my movement, glasses on it. Hey, the blotter. I take my shots. I talk, I feel it that she wanted to. She knows that's the reason why she moves. She walks, she gets a little closer. I smell danger. Go up, body of a model. Independent, do what she gotta do. I see you looking from a distance. In my mind, I'm steady thinking. She bad in the motherfucker. 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 No time, let's get to this. You bad, I like your movement. Your smile, your lips and hair too. Exclusive to the fan.
That's shit. Well, that's okay. What's going on? And that's the slavery. I feel the flag is dying. So they should wanna die. I walk a little bit closer. I see that she's no danger. I talk and feel that she leaving. But that's not me thinking. So body of a model. She's depending do what she gotta do. I see you looking from a distance. In my mind I'm steady thinking, she bad than the motherfucker. 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 Slow up, body of a model. Independent, do what she gotta do. I see you looking from a distance. In my mind I'm steady thinking, she bad than the motherfucker. She bad than the motherfucker. She bad than the motherfucker.
This is that for everybody, anybody. For everybody, anybody. For everybody, anybody. For everybody, anybody. Haters get way back, 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 or get sprayed back, way back. Haters get way back, 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 or get sprayed back, way back. Haters gon' hate on the G, the way it's supposed to be. You can hate but don't come close to me. Be a dose of C, look like hypocrisy to me. Your girl sleep next to Ghost for sure. Give me more, don't bark at me. Not a 106 and parking C. I say it's free, Yo, it up, friend. My hip hop from the top, show stop the whole block so hot. Get the guap, rock chop, make the block knock, no escape. My mindset, beat a nigga down like a prom nigga. Catch the bait, cause you hate it, emulate the greats. Haters get way back, cause my payback goes way back. Like the big payback on 8-track. Keep it real, no faking beef. I'm crooked like a K8, have you looking like the number 8. I can count about 8, they hate on the great. They mad cause they got 8 in their own state. For everybody, anybody. For everybody, anybody. For everybody, anybody. For everybody, anybody. Haters get way back, 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 or get sprayed back, way back. Haters get way back, 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 or get sprayed back, way G. What you want it to be is the question. I believe you will bleed if we proceed with this session. Show the next gimmick to mimic my flow. Malcolm X's chest had his own show. This nigga had his hand in my pocket. Yo, you see your G with a couple grands in his wallet. In my stance when I'm rocking. Niggas steady jocking paparazzi. Probably federality's gotta be hating so hard. Cause if I go hard, I bogart the whole squad. Make an atheist pray to God. Don't betray a God. Some say I'm out again even. JFK horror kings like Steven. Believe it. You can hate harder, hit harder. Heavy nigga. Have a hate a nigga. Heavy spitter. How can't you hear this nigga? Hating heathens, hating on his hip hop. Hero speaking for them hood niggas leaking. For everybody, anybody. For everybody, anybody. For everybody, anybody. For everybody, anybody. Haters get way back, 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 or get sprayed back, way back. Haters get 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 way back. Or get way back. Yeah. You have entered Blood the Blouse, Volume 2, the best of O.stylez.
Sounds like money, babe.
If you don't know who O.stylez is, by the end of this CD, you will know. Big shout out to KG, Back Sound Productions, TR Productions, LOA Mac Beat Productions, and Underground ENT. Me and my family. KG, yeah. I had to spray you right then so you could be prepared for what you about to enter. So I done sprayed you down. It's time to go.
This is it. I know y'all been waiting for it, right? But it is here. Prices. He about to bring it to y'all. You never seen it. You never knew it was coming till it was too late. This is it. O.stylez co-signs it. O.stylez co-signs it. I put the whole underworld on it. Yes. Get him, Christ. We about to take y'all into a new era, a new age. This is where real hip-hop went. Back to the underground. Christ, mayhem.
It's my turn, now you'll see. Christ is true mentality. Follow me through my world. Boys and girls, you gon' need fatality. If you bad to me, I'm gon' be laughing after victory. Mention me when I destroy this.
Why don't I just give her the money I was gonna spend? Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, my name is Riley, son. But you know, niggas call me AKA Riley Escobar. You know what I'm saying? Cause I'm in the street, you know? That nigga gon' pay what he owes.
Get my money, get my dough, get my dough, get my dough. You better get my money, get my dough. Get my dough, you got to pay what you owe. You better get my money, get my dough, get my dough, get my dough. You better get my money, get my dough, get my dough. You got to pay what you owe. Just like them guns blow. Get sprayed if you don't pay me my fucking bread today. I don't give a fuck what you gotta say. No excuses to me. I don't give a fuck about to say this shit loosely. I'll leave a nigga head like a loose leaf in the wind. If you niggas try to pretend I am not playing with you niggas at the game, it's a game. You should know my motherfucking name. I'm about to start slaying niggas that acting like they don't know the flow is coming from a bento instrumental. Pay all the dough that you borrow, all the fucking commissary that you think you gotta pay all the money. Get my dough, get my dough, get my dough. You better get my money, get my dough, get my dough. You about to pay what you owe. You better get my money, get my dough, get my dough, get my dough. You better get my money, get my dough. Get my dough, you about to pay what you owe. Ain't gon' say this shit no more. Fuck it, niggas about to start kicking buckets. And you know I love it when niggas try to act like I ain't the lyrical god in my underworld squad. Don't really go hard. I be fucking playing with a real nigga in the fucking game. Niggas know what I'm saying. Got the AK spraying on your block all day. And J rep the shit every time that I play. Y'all niggas gotta know it's the flow from the motherfucking nigga O.stylez. And nobody fucking with me. I get busy. And I'm trying to get my fucking bread up. Oh, I nigga head cause you better get my money. Get my dough. Get my dough. Get my dough. You better get my money. Get my dough. Get my dough. You about to pay what you owe. You better get my money. Get my dough. Get my dough. Get my dough. You better get
money, get my dough. Get my dough, you about to pay what you owe. You gotta pay up, nigga. Pay what you owe. And my boondocks got my fucking Glock and my sock. Y'all niggas don't know how we rock on this motherfucking turf. You niggas know it's about to get worse. About to leave a nigga hurt. But you playing in the field, playing in the fucking game. Y'all niggas know it's real. And you niggas know how we fucking feel about you lame ass gangsters. I'm a fucking thank ya and thank ya for your motherfucking business. Niggas mind your motherfucking business. I knock at your door like Jehovah's Witness.
Hey, you with the afro, give it a rest, beat it, put the music back on.
Man, can I live for the one time? See my kids for the one time. Watch my son cry for the one time. I'm tired of frontline, I wanna see the sunshine. Man, can I live for the one time? All smiles, mama proud for the one time. Remember, I ain't had no money for the lunch line, so fuck a one time, nigga, this is crunch time. Listen, I come from a hood with a good die. Young or old, lifting poles to the sunrise. And when the sun down, you hear them guns sound. Nobody lasts forever, you get one round. OG used to run the block, he a bum now. That's what the streets do, chew you up and spit you out. I could've took the easy way, I chose a different route. Skrilla grew, who would've knew they wouldn't listen now? I used to downplay them guns, now I'm lifting cows. That mean I handle all my beats, me and my 50 cal. I may not make the best music, but just hear me out. Wild dreams on the couch while I'm off the loud. Thinking about getting rich, I just wonder how. Is it school, sports, rap, standing by the trap? Already did the late nights, getting rid of packs. Niggas that I used to know, I heard sniffing crack. So instead of trying to match, started spitting raps. Instead of living out their life, niggas getting clapped. Never knew, bull could have been heaven sent. In the NBA, maybe even president. But gave him DOA over there, presidents. In this game, don't got no time for no second guess. You can't think in retrospect, you gotta recollect. Move smart, see parasites, you gotta disinfect. You see a shortage in the plug, you gotta disconnect. See, I keep the bank low, while these niggas flexing. Try and maneuver in my hood and get intercepted. But don't think shit sweet when we in the club. No disrespecting in direction, I'll kill your section. For getting checked in. Came in with my weapons just to give me a little leverage. Why these niggas sweating? Rob the whole dice game, nigga, what you betting? The streets changed, it's all about the Ralph Lauren. Well, I got another way, I'm trying to walk towards it. If you got a chance at college, nigga, go for it. Stop trying to live a gritty life you ain't built for. Cause there's niggas that live this life and got killed for. Man, can I live for the one time? See my kids for the one time. Watch my son cry for the one time. I'm tired of frontline, I wanna see the sunshine. Man, can I live for the one time? All smiles, mama proud for the one time. Remember, I ain't had no money for the lunch line, so fuck a one time, nigga, this is crunch time.
Here's my plan.
The song is very mental. If your mind is not open, you might not understand this shit. Y'all gotta say this shit for me. Say this shit for me. Say it. I will never be broken. Say that shit, y'all. Say that shit, yo. I will never be broken. Feel this shit, y'all. Feel this shit. Come on. I will never be broken. I know y'all like that. We about to go and come on. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2.
Now here's my
1,
plan.
2. Yo, I'm back on my political politics shit. Y'all really wanna get high and dance in this bitch like that's all we got to spit. It's alright, here I go. Turn up. If you sold your soul on your way to hell, I hope you burn up. Trying to bring a brother down. Using ignorance, trying to bring a brother down. So it's always man down. Cause a real strong dude will never back down till he dead in the ground. I only give my real niggas pounds like it's a pound. They take the pound and move that pound around the whole town like this shit is going down. It's wild words spoken. Never be broken. Even when you're feeling useless as it's so it's okay. Keep faith while your niggas keep hoping. Never know what the unknown be knowing. In these streets, G's be holding. Texas AKs, I rep NYC, BA,
NJ, back to FLA. Got soldiers down to ride for me. What's it fine for me? Like a rivalry. What you gotta say? Vow to never be broke another day. Shouts to the brother J, consistent elevation every day. Cause I live these revelations every day. I'm so blessed by the best, I'm okay. This bomb shit has no detonation on this day. Who's to say? Prince Obama made the bomb in every way. Escape ghosts for road, cause niggas stay away. It's an outrage. Pussy cats acting like lions in the cage. Politics to make a young nigga age. Watch what you do, cause they trying to toss you front page. Leave your ass broken, catch you drinking while you smoking wide open. On my overflow, some don't even know about their own oracle. Speak to future and it's constant. It knows before you even know, call it conscious. Make your mark, live your life, remain conscious. Cause these streets ain't beat for that nonsense. Why these imposters coming back to the hood? Hell hostage, coast to coast, like you can't get ghost. Rolling through the hood, nonchalant, bitch nigga get roast. Like fuck the fame, fuck your game. These niggas in the game to change. Some things still remain the same. Stay in your own lane. Never tell a hating nigga that you own thing. When you see things, you don't know no thing. Cause you too may be hit with them hot things. I'm just saying in these streets they ain't playing cause they hungry. These niggas don't matter. These goons don't wanna rob a bank, yo. They rather rob rappers, quick money. It's less chance to capture. And the boys don't really care if a nigga blast ya. All my people shout, never be broke for this next chapter. Here we go, here we go. Never be broke, yeah. Say that shit, y'all. Say that shit, yo. I will never be broken. Feel this shit, y'all. Feel this shit, come on. I will never be broken. I know y'all like that. We about to go and come on.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Charge it to the game. Cannot stop, cannot stop, will not stop, cannot stop. Took a lot of losses from a lot of bosses. I don't give a fuck what the cost is. I'ma get it. I'ma be the nigga in the street all night till the morning. Yawning, talking about where these niggas fucking coming, where the motherfucking rock sells. I'm an old head, so what? Oh well, I don't give a fuck. I got a story to tell. Gotta get this dough. Gotta get this bread. Gotta get this cash. Gotta get these niggas head that try to dash with that bag. Trying to get on my cheddar. Y'all niggas better get your shit together. I'm tougher than leather and Run DMC. Put the fuck together. When the nigga cut, yo, I sever. Don't get on my fucking level. Cannot stop, cannot stop, will not stop, cannot stop. Charge it to the game. Cannot stop, cannot stop, will not stop, gotta charge it to the game. Cannot stop, cannot stop, will not stop, cannot stop. Charge it to the game. Cannot stop, cannot stop, will not stop, cannot stop. I done took too many setbacks, time to get back up top. When the nigga gotta rock, gotta get the spot hot. But the niggas got this shit on lock. Y'all niggas feel the wrath of the clock. Y'all niggas feel them shots too hot for your head now. Nigga dead now, all red pals. Niggas shit a fuck around with the niggas that's trying to do it. Cause we flowing like they fluid nasty low. No, we knew it, how we do it. I rep my squad, underworld shit. I rep my shit, underworld shit. O.stylez bringing that underworld shit. I will not stop this shit, underworld shit. Charge it to the game. Gotta charge it to the game. Charge it to the game. Light the light and spark the fire up, it's louder here. Gotta move the fucking crowd in here. Y'all niggas know it's no mistakes allowed in here.
This is that new type of hip hop. I'ma get it down in here, underground in here. Yeah, this the sound in here. Y'all niggas about to move around in here. I'm going down in this bitch. This a freestyle rip. I ain't have to write shit, cause I'm hype as fucking shit. I'm lit. I'ma talk that shit, walk that shit. Let a nigga spit. I'ma spit. Hit his hip hop. Y'all niggas don't. I am just a man. I know it's hard to understand the dirt on my hands. I do what I can, a lot I can't do. I still do what I can't do for my fam and my crew. Dodging boys in blue. Lost a lot of bulls in this zoo trying to survive. But they died, still arise, waiting for my time of judgment is meant for the times I cross the line. Evil thoughts of the mind, corrupt design, sign of the times. What I've seen make me wish I was blind from the time I realize God's plan can't be recognized or patronized. You gotta keep faith and ride till you die. No need to cry, ask why I wait. My fate or my demise till the rise to the skies. You can slip, you can slide, run but you can't hide. Nobody gets out alive. Gotta grab a hold of your life. Never sell your soul for stripes. All you get is strikes. Live trife, get stripe. What's your life like? Throw the first stone I birth. Thugs in harmony like flesh and bone. Just in my zone, I can't phone home since I woke. Yo, I feel so alone. Y'all don't hear me though. Like I'm a weirdo for knowing what I know. A lot more than you think I know. Need a head string. That's why my pen bleed ink. Strongest link when we link sight to the mind. They will never understand what I'm saying, but in due time, tell me what did you find? Look in your mind. New design, O.stylez, time to climb, let's shine. The highway and it's mighty fucking long. It's full of twists and turns, so you know the shit's gonna go wrong. You can slip, you can slide, you can run, but you can't hide. Nobody gets out alive. Life is a highway and it's mighty fucking long. It's full of twists and turns, so you know the shit's gonna go wrong. You can slip, you can slide, you can run, but you can't hide.
Who really wanna tax me? The number one killer name, shitting on tracks, leaving them stains, some styles be whack. I hop on a beat and attack, extract your raps from your ass crack. Style is whack, believe that. I've been on the stack, in fact, my flows are similar to some when I'm on. Bound to too many states, from the east to the west coast, I run with the most. Tag my flows, so who run it? I'm running shit. 6 clips with 8 chips, laying body stiff on the still tip. I whip like flashes, house the niggas for stash shit. Get high with some money in their face, then put my ass on it. I'm the baddest.
Spit around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spit around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spit around, hit the ground, make a shot. Hit the ground, make a shot. Spit around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spit around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spit around, hit the ground, make a shot. Hit the ground, make a shot.
Yo, my gas don't bust, niggas fuck for life. I make it hard up in the dark, taking shows for life. Never turn up on the thug, I got his mile of war. Niggas wanna bring war, yeah, we all for y'all. Niggas run for your life. Niggas come, when the third block ride. Niggas wanna bring war, yeah, we all for war. Niggas talking out of war shit, I'm bringing the thugs out. Guns out, run, 32, run for your life, nigga, run for your life.
Spit around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spit around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spit around, hit the ground, make a shot. Hit the ground, make a shot. Spit around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spit around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spit around, hit the ground, make a shot. Hit the ground, make a shot.
I might rob an icer. You know
show a high pricer, just to show I'm the nicer. Mike the Vicer, run it, I catch it in your stomach. Now you're plumb, then begin to numb it. Your death coming, your gut running over. Nice to know ya, brother blow ya. Thanks for letting me know you had the keys to the Rover. Roll over, the praise to Jehovah. Shut up, no talking. I said running, not speed walk. Watch me go to spot, eating pop rock, sipping slow rocks with your back to back. Axe connected in credit grade deep socks. Cock the clock and make it run it. Still I win, you can't explain who done it. No clue who, how you got shot. Now I can rap about what I got a lot. Crack the Henny shop. I make mini rock at the any spot. They stay plenty hot. Props, scrubs need mini mops. Fuck around and run it. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Hit the ground, make a shot. I make all this slicks like the bus lines. I bust rhymes, 40 thugs bust rhymes. I bust fines. Well, all those who wanna bust mines, trust that I'm not the one to bust that. So best believe I bust back. Faster than bust and bust can bust fast rash. I make you shake your ass crack. Fight a L and pass that. Got jewels and flash that. Got cash and stash that. No, that's that. Cheesy rap trap, head clap rap. Not that crap. Head these cats spitting, they get slap. For the whack jaw flap. I spit the raw rap. And I got more than that. So why you debating about who's playing hating? I got a cake baking and I'm tired of creating and waiting. I'll be straight when they on a run through. I'm ever ready to rumble. I'm getting that when I come through. I'm stone cold enough to stun you. 316. I'm not the one to come best. I come stressed. I'm all about the success. Hit the ground, run it. Really, you don't want it. No credit. We don't front it. Lick a shot, run it. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Spin around, hit the ground, make a shot. Shot. Spin around, hit the ground, lick a shot. Hit the ground, lick a shot.
Real shit. Only you. We who right by my side. Only you. We'll be right there when I die. Only you. When I cap you, will be slide. Only you. We'll be my
had the cock back the flicker on the nigga. I'm like, click, clack, shawty got crazy kick back. Made this lazy boy, kick back. Yo, you brought me mad stacks, keep my enemies way back. Stay strapped since way back. Street sweepers, spray cats, 44s and Galagos for 30 hoes. Kick those, rip souls, out of assholes for being assholes. Ass sounds and hoodies and black holes. Case smash, can you show them how that Mac goes? Y'all battle rap foes, we attack hoes. Those who pull, Joseph up, hold, or who really roll. Pull this go, nosy niggas blasting they nose, blast up they clothes. Who really knows with them strays go? Fuck what you know, it's pay what you owe. Brother, I will take another for my many brothers run for cover. This gun is so big, brother, different. dead motherfucker like you fuck my baby mother.
We gon' ride by my side. Only you will be right there when I die. Only you when I count you, oh it's like. Only you will be my countdown for life. I come through in that all black, made back, laid back, turn the neighborhoods into the racetrack, case smash back, and I'm big like an ape's back, sold off shoddy, and it comes with a kick back, 40 shots, double 40 Glocks, I got the shot where it's whipped back, 38, no trace, so I can ditch that, rifle from 10 yards, I can't miss that, hit your wife, hit you, and then angry when you get that, niggas know me, man I never phony, you already know how I do nigga, just ask my homies, screaming AK, don't give them 47, scrap, leave them alive, 4-5 is guaranteed a nigga die, when I'm gripping this eagle, Smith and Sippin' jumping, they leave you dead, rip through the skull, after that, we can see your head, or see your brains, this nigga's insane, case smashes in the game, nigga, you niggas lame. We go right, side by side, only you will be right there when I die. Only you, when I got you, bullets fly. Only you will be my gun for life. Only you.
I eat breakfast 300 yards from 4,000 Cubans who are trained to kill me, so don't think for 1 second that you can come down here, flash a badge, and make me nervous.
Ripping the ones and twos with the hottest new joints. Ripping the ones and twos with the hottest new joints. Coast to coast mixtape DJ.
Yippee, man. UWO, Underworld officials. This my territory. H is on top to the world blow, nigga. You dig? Start from the top, I'm looking for the drop. Got the streets on watch and they looking for the cops. I'm holding the gun, which one do I pop? I just let off 5 and got one more shot. And since you in the kitchen while the water is hot, well guess who's getting hit with that boiling pot? I'm not trying to send a diss, I'm just sending a shot for anybody in my way, on my way to the top. Will give me a reason to pull out these 9 season, slide down my sleeve and bust him in his chest, that'll give him slow breathing, leave a nigga wheezing for committing that treason, flatline even, twin Glock 40s, 1 Cal, 1 Keen, and I'm living this life, these niggas is still dreaming, these shots that I gotta take you out for the season, elected for another poor nigga, I'm not leaving.
I'm from the hood, but you already know, I get it poppin', but you already know, they show me love, but you already know, I got the plug, but you already know. So please don't get gas, cause you already know. I'm in my bag and you already know. My waist, I got the mag, but you already know. Stay in place for shit get bad, cause you already know.
Watch me work with the level I'm on. When I spit, you get sick at my spectacular form. Can't smash, no, that's not it. My whole squad is strong. I see royalty. For that foolery, then your loyalty gone. Game of chess, I'm a king. I don't talk to no pawns. My circle tight, play me wrong, get left, right on the lawn. I'm the clutch, a warrior. Got the soul of LeBron. With this music, start acting stupid once the beat come on. Start to lose it, it gets the music when the beat go off. Start rhyming at 15 and I ain't never fell off. Any beat I make weak, make a vet look soft. My suggestion of first impression, Big L's resurrection. I'm here for hip hop, y'all about to pay collection. I live from the waistline, and I don't beef on the internet. Just for to give you FaceTime. You take 7 valuable player, I call that game time. I'm from the hood, but you already know. I get it poppin', but you already know. They show me love, but you already know. I got the plug, but you already know. So please don't get gas, cause you already know. I'm in my bag and you already know. My waist, I got the mag, but you already know. Stay in place for shit get bad, cause you already know.
Nasty, smash, crisis, underworld officials. Dig up. You know who the nice is. Crisis, disrespect, don't let that happen. Kick smash, cause that'll have me snapping. Kick smashing, become a crisis. You know who the nice is. Crisis, disrespect, don't let that happen. Kick smash, cause that'll have me snapping. Kick smashing, become a crisis.
I'm about to get it cracking. This is a jacking. Your reaction is you just seen the masked man. You the waste to get managed.
Right with the trash can.
Pussy niggas get slapped.
Followed by the backhand.
I'ma build a casket big enough to fit Shaq in and treat your family like Mexicans and make them pack in. I don't do no talking, I'm giving all action. These shells kick to the stomach, it's like an attraction. Gun name Hicks.
First name Braxton.
I'm kicking through your troops while I'm coming for your captain. I smash first, no questions asked. Go for the head, he act furious, I finish him fast. My move, you lose while I'm beating your ass. Kicks like steel toe, with knuckles is brass. A left will wake him up, a swift kick make him crash. But my clans will clash, if potato get mashed. But back to the future, still you'll get killed in the past. Underworld, my brothers keep a nigga, that's what we have. But lift for the mag, I'm getting you dragged. Plug.
You know who the nice is. Crisis, disrespect, don't let that happen. Kick smash, cause that'll have me snapping. Kick smashing, become a crisis. You know who the nice is. Crisis, disrespect, don't let that happen. Kick smash, cause that'll have me snapping. Kick smashing, become a crisis.
Did someone just say my name? If I drain your main vein, you only have yourself to blame. Cannot be tamed, but dames can sure try. The aim I shoot by, you can hit a fruit fly. I might be too fly, I think I need to touch down. Can't smash in your zone, it won't be a touchdown. I won't give him a pound, I found a clown deserves a pound. And even in the underground, and found a hole to put you down in. See if we surrounded him, and that's a double meaning. I can see this being the worst predicament you ever been in. Hit so hard, it's like I'm double teaming. Trouble brews, I keep it steaming. When you beat me, you was dreaming. Ain't no way in go ask Keenan. Damn, I'm on like his brother. Spit him out like they mother. Got my crew and all the others. Just enough to smother. Undercover lover, but bang bras in the open. I'm gon' hit it, girl, and stay with it. That's what she was hoping. But not what I had spoken. I got a world to rule. And even Bobby Brown know I'm cruel, though I'm so cool. And no, I'm no fool. My GPA high as the voice on me shall lay. There ain't no more that we can say.
You know who the nice is. Crisis. Disrespect, don't let that happen. Kick smash, cause that'll have me snapping. Kick smashing, become a crisis. You know who the nice is. Crisis, disrespect, don't let that happen. Kick smash, cause that'll have me snapping. Kick smashing, become a crisis.
Underworld.
I strive to be the best. I step above the press. I strive to be the best. I step above the press. I strive to be the best. I step above the press. I strive to be the best. This my testimony, had to get this off my chest. I have hustled every day of my life. Every day of my life I dealt with pain, heartache, and strife. Decisions dark and light. Night and day, too much to talk about, too much to say. If I dare to be the biggest snitch, and NJ got burnt in the fire. Face look like Ghost Rider, thought at 13, young and would expire by 18. Tired of crackheads, tricks and liars. Brick City, the movie, I lived in the wire by 21. Here I come, wild style gon' set this whole world on fire. Before I retire, be admired. The coast to coast, hood to hood rider. Street unity inspired. I made this underworld shit transpire. Still I rise like Maya, director, editor, and writer. Put this underground shit together like MacGyver. Where's the screwdriver, hammer, nails, and pliers? I built the empire.
This my testimony for all that really ride for the Tony. This my testimony, surrounded by fans and crowds, but I'm still lonely. This my testimony, never sold my soul for money, always stayed hungry. This my testimony, I never been a fall, fake or phony, but the tape is still on.
I strive to be the best. I step above the rest. I strive to be the best. I step above the rest. I strive to be the best. I step above the rest. I strive to be the best. This my testimony, had to get this off my chest. I done moved all type of rocks through all type of blocks. Suit and tie guys' house while the jocks get served for the guap. Never forget, stab the shop for the guap. For that I thank God a lot. Real rapper, only link with squads that's hot, and a lot of not. I gotta speak my mind, I testify and rhyme. Every time I spit a line, it's mine from my mind. In real time, I'm on my grind, eating like it's meal time. Let's make a deal time, cause I got some artists about to put them on the market. If you're killing hip hop, you a target. I got a lot of dogs that ain't barking. Up the wrong tree, we be sparking. Million Man Martian, generals, lieutenant, sergeants. Ride for the cause, cause you're fucking up this culture of ours. And I really mean this, I'ma do this thing till I see Jesus.
This my testimony for all that really ride for the Tony. This my testimony, surrounded by fans and crowds, but I'm still lonely. This my testimony, never sold my soul for money, always stayed hungry. This my testimony, I never been a fall, fake or phony, but the tape is still on.
I strive to be the best. I step above the press. I strive to be the best. I step above the press. I strive to be the best. I step above the press. I strive to be the best. This my testimony, had to get this off my chest.
This underground, this underworld. When you ride with me, I'm officially a part of this underground, this underworld. When you ride with me, I'm officially a part of this underground, this underworld. When you ride with me, I'm officially a part of this underground, this underworld. When you ride with me.
Feel like a general in this underground music scene with a star feed. Every time I drop a beat, meet and greet, break your teeth, cause I'm a beast. Think you bad, go against my team. Yeah, you fail, let them win. Victory through misery, overcome this heresy. All this lunacy is just pushing me over the edge, over your obsession. About time for these fuck boys are gonna listen. Then I drop another banger, do this shit like cliffhanger. Think I fell off always changing. New style every time, brain pain with every line. Feel my vibe, I'll knock you to the ground. There is no next time. Underworld, true hustle quick, man. You don't know who you fucking with. Yeah, twist the sun, feel general. Motherfucker, armies gonna take over, son. Underworld official. Underworld official.
I'm officially a part of this underground, this underworld. Will you ride with me? I'm officially a part of this underground, this underworld. Will you ride with me? I'm officially a part of this underground, this underworld. Will you ride with me? I'm officially a part of this underground, this underworld. Will you ride with me? Right now, up in this motherfucker, underworld officials. Somebody talk to me, please. Twisted Slim, Freeze, Rhino, can't smash. Somebody say they ain't dreaming. You cannot name nobody better. We're here, go through any weather, rain, sleet, snow or storm, hell or whatever. You got to die, this is never. I'm too clever, stay about my path. I'm looking for that cash money in the bag. They scream, underworld, we need you. Official screaming people, but yelling underworld. Will you ride with me? Underworld. Ride with me. I'm officially a part of this underground, this underworld. Will you ride with me? I'm officially a part of this underground, this underworld. Will you ride with me? I'm officially a part of this underground, this underworld. Will you ride with me? I'm officially a part of this underground, this underworld. Will you ride with me?
Hustle on the game, everybody knows. I'm bad to the bone. I say I'm bad to the bone. True hustle on the game, everybody knows. Bad to the bone. I'm bad to the bone. Let me switch my tone, underworld. O.stylez, let me get this. Turn your headphones up while I spit the sick shit. Underworld officials, you already know I live this. A train bomb to go, exactly where your kids live. Black ops swag, no camping where I live. Can't come back for that third time like them two did. K-Smash holding it down, don't let me lose it. The face of the officials, O.stylez show me the movement. Get down, I lay down, I had you looking stupid. I walk into the side like you under the influence. We moving, stay winning, y'all stay losing. K-Smash the best, it's been proven. You already know niggas when we get the cash, looking for that steady dough, gotta bring the Remy back. But these dudes on that lay low, for that yayo, let that lay go and jump if he say so. Pockets fat like the ass on J-Lo. Underworld niggas salute us. Back to the bone, true hustle on the game, everybody knows. To the bone. I said I'm bad to the bone. True hustle in the game, everybody knows. I'm bad. Yo, to the bone. Out the ashes, enjoy these ratchet hoes and motherfuckers that'll stab you in the back quick. Damn, but you had a matching thing like an animal. Apex, pretty yeah, man, before you bury up. This is my territory, think I'm scared of y'all. Throw me in the click, I fucks with. Say you run shit, but how can you when you ain't done shit? You say you run shit, but how can you when you ain't done shit? Yo. Always find kicks to your jaw, Bruce Lee. TKO, show them mercy, but you transverse me, but you learn it. Every time I make you look dumb, your stomach turning with fear. Shed them tears when you fall, I won't get you when you drop. You think you will a spot, you think you bad, take everything you ever had, destroy your past, take over the future, I set my own path. Concept you'll never grasp, you're a plain dumbass, and you know it's true too, think I give a fuck about you. Take back and have some real life. I say shit. Twist slam on this track, eradicating, bitch. What you want? Nothing. Back to the ball. True hustle on the game, everybody knows. I'm back to the ball. I said I'm back to the ball. True hustle on the game.
The wake up. That's all we do. That's all we do. Me and you. That's all we do. All we do is break up. The wake up. That's all we do. That's all we do. That's all we do. You mad at me? I'm bet with you. What we gon' do? Like we living in the zoo. Every night another fight between me and you. Got me tight, can't get right. Well, I guess that's like you don't hear me though. You don't even love me no more. So I'm back out the door. Can't think of none of love more. So I'm back for more. Thinking of the way we was before. Roses from the stove. Can't ignore. Seems like we at war. Cause all we do is break up. The make up. That's all we do. That's how we do. That's all we do. All we do is break up. The make up. That's all we do. That's how we do. Me and you. That's all we do. All we do is break up. The make up. That's all we do. That's how we do. That's all we do. All we do is break up. The make up. That's all we do. That's how we do. That's all we do. I've been there when you were scared. Stay prepared for all of the evils out there. Lay my life down right there. Without you, you know I don't care. When loose and double, then you been my breath of fresh air. Broke my air in this madness. My chick is the baddest. Forever glad I had it. So I understand. We continue building magic. Making love like rabbit. Just wonder if carrots, diamonds, stars, I want you to have it. The break up. All we do. That's how we do. That's all we do.
Wake up, sunshine through the window. Rolling up a split for window because I might go schizo. Get me through the day, wishful. Got something to say, get a pencil. Smoke like a leaf, legalize freedom. THC, the guys, they don't wanna beat them. More they talk, yeah, they more they feed us. Live that vamp life. I'm not afraid to bleed on Facebook. Gangsters always afraid to see us, but I'm over it. Old cat, I'm closing it, rolling, never smoking it. Pour another drink of shit, not an addict, handle this. Mind over body, produce another hit. Shit, no one can stop me, ain't that some shit? Go from the valley, that's where I call home. Always room to grow, individuality. Never see me fall, stay true. But the storm start like a lightning ball. Stay with the heat, never get cold. Right out of home, make sure I live right today. I'ma do it my way. I'ma do it my way. If I got a mom, make sure I live right today. I'ma do it my way. I'ma do it my way. Sometimes I'm on rather when haters hassle. Bitch, I got a castle brick wall to the sky. Always hears that will understand that shit nonsense. Put your fucking head on the mantle for the trophy for the next. Overbooked because you got a consequence. Always rolling up shit, creep with no paddle. When you fuck with me, whole nother level twisty. Let me explain the name, hard time relentlessly. Patiently waiting, watching other rappers portray the hood life. You as fake as little ways skating. Quarter breaking style while you ahead. If I see you in person, strange shaking, claiming that you made bread. Ain't no such thing as halfway crooks. Scared to death, man, you scared to look. Ain't no such things as halfway crooks. They you scared to death, or man, you scared to look. If I got a home, make sure I live right today. I'ma do it my way. I'ma do it my way. If I got a home, make sure I live right today. I'ma do it my way. I'ma do it my way. I've been through a lot, and it changed me. The words that used to burn me don't faze me now. If you try to bullshit, man, you crazy. Take it hands to take me. I got family and it's true friends. Always got my back to the end. When I make it big, they'll never struggle again. Money won't change me, fame won't take me. Look the other way when haters hating. Always in life, catch yourself racing. To meet that goal, got your hope taken. Keep your head up, there's no mistaking. I'll keep trying till I'm dead, Paul been digging. There ain't no wishing, only work comes first and play it later. And play it later. Yeah, do the right, make them hate better. Yeah, do the right, make them hate better. If I got a mom, make sure I live right today. I'ma do it my way. I'ma do it my way. If I got a mom, make sure I live right today. I'ma do it my way. I'ma do it my way.
I got that booty, y'all. I'm about to school you, y'all. Ganja, marijuana, y'all. Don't let them fool you all. If you still smoking, but you ain't never choking, your drug dealer is joking to sell the stuff you toting. I sell it to you all, or mail it to you all. Ganja, marijuana, y'all. So strong you're gonna fall. So take my word from me, although you never heard of me. I promise you you'll get so high, you swear you gon' need surgery. Go get your Dutch and your tree and then roll it up. Now get your lighter, your blunt and then throw it up. Get started to sip it and smoke it up. Smoke it up. You done get a blunt and then roll it up. Swig, dump it, break it, insert tree, and always sparking, sharing chillers if you feel I'm being real. I ain't open, wicked swig, dump it, break it, insert tree, and always sparking, sharing chillers if you feel I'm being real. I ain't open, wicked swig, dump it, break it, insert tree, and always sparking, sharing chillers if you feel I'm being real. I ain't open, wicked swig, dump it, break it, insert tree, and always sparking, sharing chillers if you feel I'm being real. Selling what to you? I got that good for you. Ganja, marijuana, y'all. Here's what you all should do. Come to the O where you could get dro and push that verse slow. I know cause I'm smoking between this flow and the show. Now you tried all the rest. Crisis, I got the best. Ganja, marijuana, y'all. Let me get this in my chest. I got a PhD. That's a potent herb degree. So if you got some cash, bring your ass. Come and smoke with me. Go get your Dutch and your tree and then roll it up. Now get your lighter, your blunt and then throw it up. Now you can spark it to sip it and smoke it up. You done get a blunt and then roll it up.